Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Neglected Naruto has the legacy of Primordial Fox. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by Leaf Ranger, link in the description and support writer. Let's start the video. Chapter 1. The woods around Konohagakure no Sato were quiet and calm in the mid-afternoon sun. But one area wasn't calm. A blonde 15-year-old ninja in an orange and black suit was stumbling along. Naruto Uzumaki suddenly fell to his knees and grabbed his stomach. Underneath his clothes, the eight-pronged seal began to pulse again. Naruto grimaced in pain as the pain pulsed through him. Slowly, it lessened and Naruto was able to get to his feet. He slowly turned back and looked back at his home. It was a fair distance away. Naruto sighed, as this would be the closest he would ever come to his old home until he figured out what was wrong. It had started ever since Sasuke had entered his mindscape and disrupted the Kyuubi. Ever since then, he had felt weird every time he had used his chakra. Now, a week later, he felt horrible pain, which came from the seal that kept the Kyuubi no Kitsune locked in him. The pain had expanded and now, with every pulse, it hurt his whole body. He tried reaching out to the Kyuubi, but all he had heard was howls of pain. Whatever was happening was affecting them both. Suddenly, he felt another wave of pain. He dropped to his knees, wrapping his arms around his stomach. This time though, the pain didn't recede. It kept going and going. Eventually, it faded, leaving Naruto sweating and twitching. What's happening to me? He got up and began to stumble away. He had barely gone 10 steps when another wave of pain slammed into him. He fell over and screamed in pain. Suddenly, he felt his ears shift and it almost felt like they were melting. His pants became tighter at the back. He screamed in pain again, causing the birds to flap away in alarm. Several days later, Tsunade, the goddamn Hokage of Konoha, stared out the window of her office. Behind her, several Anbu appeared. "I'm sorry Lady Tsunade, but we have found nothing so far." His trail disappears in a clearing. "We did find these those." The Anbu held out a scrap of orange cloth and strands of gold hair. Tsunade looked over them. The cloth is Naruto's clothes. But this it isn't hair. It's fur. The leader of the team shrugged. Tsunade thought for a moment. She snapped her fingers. "Get me Team Kurenai. Now." The Anbu nodded and disappeared. Tsunade sighed and turned back to the window. "Naruto, where are you?" Several minutes later, Kurenai Yuuhi, Shino Abiram, Kiba Inuzuka with Akamaru, and Hinata Hyuga entered the office. Tsunade noticed that the Hyuga era seemed really down. She indicated the 2 items on her desk. "I need your team's expertise. Our Anbu teams lost Naruto Uzumaki's trail in a clearing to the southeast. I want the 4 of you to head to the clearing and see if you could pick his trail up. However, be cautious. It's possible that something involving Kyuubi has happened." Since they had attained the rank of Chunin, all of Naruto's friends had learned the truth about him. He had been away with Jiraiya, so they had time to think. In the end, it hadn't changed anything about him, so they didn't bring it up. Kurenai picked up the cloth and handed it to Kiba. He and Akamaru sniffed the cloth and nodded. Kurenai turned to Tsunade. "We will get on it right away, Hokage-sama. Team Kurenai, let's move out." The 5 of them disappeared. Tsunade sighed and picked up the hair. She slowly examined it and her brow creased in confusion. "This is almost like fox fur. What is?" Tsunade turned to see Jiraiya, the toad sage and her fellow Sannin, come through the window. He had been off doing his research in a nearby town. Tsunade sighed and held out the golden locks. Jiraiya's eyes widened. "These look like Naruto's hairs. What's been happening with the little twerp anyways? I didn't see him anywhere." Tsunade lowered her eyes. He disappeared. "No one knows where he is." Jiraiya stood there for a few moments. Then, he took one of the hairs and examined it. "It is fur. It's fox fur." "What do you mean?" "It's fox fur. But it's golden, which means that it's Naruto's hair. I think that something involving him and Kyuubi has happened." Tsunade sighed and shook her head. "This is becoming too complicated, way too fast." Team Kurenai rushed along the ground with Kiba and Akamaru in the lead. The 2 would stop and periodically sniff the ground or the air. Kiba was anxious to try and find that blonde-haired idiot for Hinata's sake. Ever since they had heard that Naruto had disappeared, Hinata had become anxious and depressed. Now, there was a small ray of hope and Kiba was going to make sure that it became more. Eventually, they came to the clearing. Immediately, they all stopped in surprise at their surroundings. Hinata gasped and held her hands to her mouth. The ground was covered in furrows and there were pieces of tree bark ripped from trees. Several branches had been broken and there were a few more shreds of Naruto's clothing around them. Akamaru sniffed a destroyed bush and whimpered. Kiba joined him. "This bush has a human scent. But that scent is almost completely masked by the scent of fox. I can't tell who this scent belongs to." Hinata activated her Byakugan. She strained her eyes, looking as far as she could in every direction. There was nothing. She released her eyes, lowering her head in defeat. I can't see Naruto-kun anywhere. He's gone. She started to cry and Kurenai came over and held her shoulders. Hinata, stop it. It just means that Naruto isn't nearby. We need to look elsewhere. She turned to Kiba. Can you follow the human scent? Kiba shook his head. I can try, but it's weak. The scent on the bush is strong because whoever did this ripped through it. But the other scent has been covered a few times by other things. Kurenai-sama, is this wise? If this is Naruto, then something has happened to him, causing him to become dangerous and wild. Perhaps we should call for reinforcements. Shino looked at his former teacher. Kiba looked at Shino. What are you talking about, man? We need to help Naruto. Kiba, look around. These claw marks, the ripped clothing. Naruto has undergone some transformation involving the Kyuubi and has become like a feral beast. We cannot risk finding him like this because we don't have the fighting strength to deal with him. Hinata shook her head, trying to clear her eyes of the tears. Kiba-kun, Shino-kun is right. Even though I want to help Naruto-kun, we wouldn't be able to do anything against him like this. She shuddered, wishing she was stronger so she could help him. So she could tell him how she felt. Kurenai nodded. It hurts, but Shino is right. Let's get back to the village. Kiba punched a tree in frustration, but eventually nodded. 3 of them left, but Hinata waited for a moment and looked into the woods. She closed her eyes and whispered, Naruto-kun, please be careful. Please, come back safely. Then, she left. She never noticed the shadow that emerged from the treetops nearby. The figure who wore a dull dark red cloak and had eyes that glowed a warm red. 3 weeks later, Ijirobe, a Chunin of Konoha, smirked as he sat down on his bed. The demon brat was gone, and he had used his time spent searching for Naruto to inform his contacts from Iwa that the Jinchuriki of Konoha was gone. He had passed over information about some of Konoha's spies in Iwa and some other vital information. Being an inside man was dangerous, but Iwa paid a lot better than Konoha did. Soon, he would be able to retire and leave the life of peace and relaxation. He pulled off his helmet that he wore and was about to pull off his vest when there was a knock on his door. He slowly stood up and headed to the door. He placed a hand on the doorknob. Who is it? Suddenly, the door blew in and Yajirobe crashed onto the floor, the door pinning his legs. He looked up to see a shadowy figure standing there. His eyes widened in horror as he saw the figure advance on him. The lights of the apartment revealed a dull dark red cloak with a hood pulled up. The wearer's eyes were hidden in shadow, but an armored face mask covered the lower part of his mouth. The face mask was red and looked like a fox muzzle pulled back to reveal rows of gold teeth. Above it was a black nose with gold whiskers coming off it. Ijirobe pulled back, trying to pull away from the figure. Who are you? That doesn't matter. What matters is that you have betrayed your village. You have betrayed the lives of your fellow shinobi. You are not fit to live. The figure spoke in a deep dark tone that was almost like a growl. The figure's eyes suddenly glowed a bright crimson red. The pupils were black crosses. Yajirobe stared at them, unable to look away. The figure kneeled next to the paralyzed man and whispered, tell me all your secrets. Now. Yajirobe rapidly began spilling all his secrets. He revealed all his contacts, all his dealings. The figure slowly nodded and stood back up. His eyes faded away, returning to the shadows of his hood. Yajirobe shook slightly as the figure slowly pulled out a kunai. What are you going to do? The only thing I am good at doing anymore. The only thing people like you thought I could ever do. He raised the knife and Yajirobe started babbling. Wait. I can give you anything. Money, woman, jutsus. Please don't do this. Sorry, but you have earned this. This is the fate of traitors like you. The kunai flashed before the traitorous Chunin could scream. Half an hour later, the figure left Yajirobe's home, pulled the door back into place, and secured it. He spray painted the kanjin for death on the door and left. It was 10 hours later before someone noticed the door. A young lady was walking past the apartment on her way to her job. She noticed the door and immediately called the landlord. He went to the door, couldn't open it, so he was forced to break it down. As soon as the door fell open, he fell back and yelled for help. Soon 8 approached the apartment. 10 Anbu were keeping people away while others investigated the room. Shizune stood nearby. Soon 8 approached her apprentice. So what is it? I sent you all down here to check it out and you sent for me, saying I need to see this. Shizune nodded. Believe me, you need to see this, Tsunade-sama. She led Tsunade into the apartment. Ijirobe was lying on the floor in a pool of blood. His throat had been cut and there was slashes on each limb. His face was frozen in fear and pain. Tsunade shuddered slightly at the sight of the blood but was otherwise calm. Then she noticed the papers lying on the bed. She picked them up and began thumbing through them. They were reports, information on Konoha spies in Iwa and other information. The last few papers were orders from the Tsuchikage. A team of Iwa shinobi were supposed to receive information from a spy named Yajirobe. Tsunade turned to look at the dead ninja. So, he was a traitor. Shizu nodded. We discovered a team of dead Iwa ninja at the gate this morning. They were just killed and dragged there. No other wounds, unlike him. The only other thing is this. Shizune pointed up on the ceiling. Tsunade looked up. On the ceiling was a symbol of a fox with a sword for a tail. Below was 2 words. Kitsune Naito. The Fox Knight. Was he the one responsible for this? Shizune shrugged. We believe so. The symbol was on one foe, the dead Iwa ninja too. Their weapons and supplies had been stolen as well. Tsunade sighed. This has been a bad month. First Naruto disappears, now this Fox Knight get a letter to Iwa. Tell them that a team of theirs was killed and that we have the bodies so they can retrieve them. Shizune nodded and left. She passed Jiraiya, who came in through the door. What's happening? Besides 3 dead foreign ninjas and a dead traitor. Tsunade indicated the symbols on the ceiling. Jiraiya looked up at them. Fox Knight. Do you think it's Naruto? Tsunade shook her head. I don't think so. Naruto isn't the type to kill. He would have turned them in alive. Jiraiya shrugged. Who knows? If the Kyuubi did something to him. Tsunade looked down. Well, if you think there is a possibility, then fine. I was going to send you to Omegakure no Sado, but I may need you here. You're staying put in Konoha for now. Jiraiya nodded. Right. Now, if you will excuse me, I'm going to do a little research. The punch Tsunade gave him could be heard outside, especially by the figure sitting on the roof opposite the apartment. The cloaked figure simply nodded and leapt away, avoiding passing ninjas, and headed out of the gates. He leapt up into the trees, turned, and looked at the village. His eyes glowed red as a few tears fell down his cheeks. This is my purpose now. Then he turned and leapt away. Chapter 2. The Reikage of Kumagakure no Sado angrily slammed a report on his desk. He looked up at the head of his Anbu. Another squad lost. Who or what is this Fox Knight? The Anbu remained silent as the Reikage stood up and paced behind his desk. Every spy in contact we have in Konoha has been killed or arrested. Every ninja squad with orders against the Leaf and its allies have been destroyed. What is he? The Anbu placed another report on the desk. We have received reports that Iwa, AIM, and Odo have had similar problems. Whoever this Fox Knight is, they are effectively destroying our spy network and defending Konoha and its allies. The Reikage snarled at the Anbu in anger. This must end. Get our 4 best jounin and have them report here. Immediately. The Anbu shined away. The Reikage sat back down and glared at the reports on his desk. What has Konoha done? What is this thing that is in the land of fire? Suddenly, 4 ninjas entered his office. One had a sword strapped to his back and a bandana tied around his head. Another had a black eye patch over his left eye and a bald head with scars all over his scalp. A third was shorter than the others and had dull gray hair and goatee. The last one was tall, ripped with muscles, and had dark green hair that covered his eyes. Each had a kumo headband and wore gray-brown clothes and gray-white vests. The muscle-bound one stepped forward. What are your orders, my lord Reikage? The Reikage stood up. We have lost another squad of ninjas in the land of fire. It is time to end this once and for all. I am sending the 4 of you in to find this Fox Knight and end him forever. Also, I'm giving you a secondary objective. If you can manage to find a Hyuga, catch them and bring them back here. It is time for us to gain the Byakugan and give Kumo a Kekai Genkai of its own. Do you all understand? The 4 of them nodded. As one they disappeared and the Reikage sat back, smirking. My 4 finest jounin. They should dispatch this Fox Knight easily. Tsunade sat back, looking over the report that Team Kakashi had given her. So, you found a team of Kumo shinobi. Kakashi nodded. There was 4 of them, all chunin, and all dead. We found this on them. He tossed a shred of cloth onto the desk. On it was the now familiar symbol of the Fox Knight. Tsunade sighed. So him again. Any ideas what this group was up to? Sakura placed a blood-stained paper on the desk. Apparently, they had orders to raid the supply caches for our border patrols. The Fox Knight jumped them somewhere past the border between fire and lightning. It seems that only 2 of them even got a chance to fight. The other 2 had shurikens and kunais riddling their backs. Tsunade sighed. This Fox Knight is increasing tensions with Iwa, Kumo, AIM, and Odo. We need to find out some way to stop or control him. Any luck on tracking him? Kakashi shook his head. Pakken couldn't track him. He covered his scent with some plant life and erased his physical trail. Whoever this person is, they know how to become untraceable. Tsunade shook her head. No one is untraceable. We'll just have to wait for Team Kurenai to get back. Their border patrol mission should have ended today, so they should be on their way home. Alright. Get some rest and be ready. I may send you guys out with Kurenai's group to find this Fox Knight. Dismissed. Kakashi, Sakura, and Sai bowed and left. Tsunade turned and looked out the window. In the 3 months since Yajirobe was found dead in his apartment, this Fox Knight had been busy. There had been 4 more deaths of Konoha shinobi, who had been spies and traitors. Another 7 ninjas had come into Anbu headquarters, confessing to lesser crimes of spying and babbling about the Fox Knight. Not only that, but all of these traitors' contacts with the foreign powers would turn up dead at the gate as well. Numerous reports had come in of the finding of corpses of foreign ninjas, all of whom usually had orders against Konoha or one of their allies. The bodies were also usually stripped of weapons and supplies. Konoha always returned the bodies to their respective homelands. But they had been receiving many angry reports and accusations. If things didn't cool down soon, there could be a 4th shinobi war. Tsunade shook her head and looked at the sky. Overhead, the clouds lazily drifted by. Naruto, wherever you are, I could use your laughter right about now. Tsunade dropped her head as she silently prayed for the blonde ninja. A few days later, Team Kurenai had stopped for the night. They had completed their mission, but had been held up by a group of Iwa ninjas who had taunted them from within Konoha territory. The ninjas had scampered away, causing Team Kurenai to waste time in chasing them back to their own land. Now, they were 3 days behind schedule. Kurenai, Shino, and Kiba had all turned in for the night, but Hinata had elected to stay up and keep watch for enemy ninjas. She sat by the fire while the others slept in the large tent. Ever since Naruto's disappearance, she had put on a strong face for others. She had been training hard, determined to become stronger. But at night, or other times when she was all alone, that is when she let the mask slip, she would cry and silently pray for Naruto's safety. That is what she was doing now. Hinata cried quietly so as not to disturb the others. She looked up at the night sky, with tears running down her cheeks. Please, whoever is up there and watching over us. Please, keep Naruto-kun safe. Please, keep him alive and well. And let him be happy, wherever he is. She started to sob and dropped her head. She was weak. Niji had been right. Her father was right. She was weak and worthless. If only I had been stronger, if only I had the courage to tell Naruto-kun how I felt, then maybe he would still be home. I don't deserve to wear this headband. An. What is the word for it? I keep seeing it in fanfics, but I forgot. Let me know please. As Hinata sat by the fire, she was unaware of 7 eyes that were watching her. The 4 Kumojounen sat in nearby trees, watching the depressed Hyuga heiress. The one with the eye patch turned to the one with green hair. So, when do we move, Hitoi? Not yet. We need to make sure she hasn't spotted us yet. Be patient, Sauken. The sword-wielding one sat back against the tree trunk. Well, I'm going to get some sleep. Wake me up when you all are ready. Hitoi jumped over and shook the sword wielder. Oh no, you don't, Suman. You keep awake or I'll take that blade and let Kishaku have his fun. The short one snickered at the thought. That would be nice. I haven't lived up to my name in a while. Hitoi moved over to him. You'll get your chance. This is the plan. Me and Sauken will capture her and draw the others out. You two deal with them. Then we will have our fun. The 4 Kumojounen smirked and waited a bit more. Unknown to them, however, a figure stood against a tree not far from them. His cloak fluttered in the slight breeze as a pair of eyes glowed blood red from inside the shadow of his cloak hood. Hinata had finally stopped crying and was about to place another log on the fire when she heard the snap of a twig being broke. She immediately activated her Byakugan, only to barely see the 2 ninjas rush up behind her. The one with muscles slammed an arm into the back of her head, causing her to fall unconscious. Sauken grabbed her, but already the tent that had been set up was moving. Hiba and Akamaru came bursting out the door and seeing what was happening, charged forward. Hitoi immediately turned to him, finishing his hand signs. Electricity burst from his fingertips and tossed both boy and dog. Their nervous systems were overloaded and they fell, temporarily paralyzed. Kurenai and Shino came out next. Kurenai had a kunai drawn and Shino was summoning his bugs. Sauken held a kunai knife to Hinata's throat. Stop, or the girl dies. Kurenai and Shino both hesitated for one fateful second. Suman's sword hilt and Kishaku's fist smashed into their heads, rendering both of them unconscious. Hinata slowly woke up, her head throbbing. She tried to raise an arm to feel it, but her arms wouldn't move. Slowly, she realized that she was tied to a tree, with her limbs bound and a gag over her mouth. She turned slightly, wincing at the pain in her head. Nearby, her teammates were tied up like her. Kiba and Kurenai were struggling, but Shino was still out. Well. The Hyuga brat is finally awake. Hitoi came over and smirked at the bound girl. You weren't our primary objective, but still, the Raikage will be glad that we brought you in. Kishaku turned to the others tied up. What about them? We don't need them, do we? Hitoi shook his head. Not at all. Why don't you have some of your fun? It might be good for the girl to see. Kishaku laughed happily and reached into a pouch as he stood up. He approached Kurenai and was about to pull out whatever it was he was going to use when there were several whistling noises, followed by a series of thuds and a grk. From Kishaku. He fell to the ground with a kunai in his head, one in his neck and two more in his spine. Almost immediately, the other three Kumojounen leapt up and formed a triangle, back to back to back. Suman had his sword out while the other two had pulled out kunais. They scanned the surrounding trees, watching. Hinata was doing the same. Her Byakugan could barely make out a movement in the woods. Sauken noticed the movement as well and flung his kunai knife ahead of where the movement was. It hit the movement, only to yield a poof of smoke. Suddenly, a figure erupted from the ground in front of him. The figure, wearing a red cloak, had red glowing eyes with black crosses. His lower face was covered in an armored face mask shaped like a snarling fox muzzle. "You guys never look down." The figure growled before punching Sauken in the face. But when he did, there was a pulse of chakra, followed by a squishing noise. Hinata gasped in revulsion at what had happened. Hidoi and Suman turned to see Sauken with three blades exiting the back of his head. The figure pulled his fist back and the blades came out with a wet squish. Sauken's dead body slumped to the ground. Hidoi and Suman looked over the quarry they had been sent to kill. The Fox Knight had on a pair of armored gauntlets. On the right one, three claw-like blades, each a foot in length, extended from above the back of the hand of the gauntlet. The Fox Knight channeled his chakra into the blades and they retracted. He opened his cloak to reveal a sheathed katana at his side. He grabbed it with his right hand and unsheathed the blade. It was 3.5 feet in length. The blade gleamed in the moonlight, running down to the crossguard, which was shaped like an open fox mouth, with the blade coming out of it. Both the scabbard and the hilt were red, while the hilt had a black diamond pattern running down each side of it. The cloak figure pointed to Suman with his blade. "You, me. Right here, right now." Suman charged forward and attacked with a blinding fast head slash. The figure ducked, punching out with his left fist. It connected with Suman's stomach and he fell back a pace. When he recovered, he tried a stab. The Fox Knight parried the blade away to the left before smashing his right elbow into Suman's face. As the Kumo sword ninja backed up, the Fox Knight swung around to his right. His blade knocked Suman's aside before his left fist smashed into Suman's already damaged face. He drew his sword back and then it entered Suman's body. The Fox Knight stepped back from his third dead opponent only to grunt as Hidoi's kunai plunged into left arm. The Fox Knight grabbed Hidoi and threw him with his right arm. As Hidoi landed, Fox pulled the knife from his arm and crushed it with one fist. He slowly advanced on Hidoi, who had managed to regain his feet. Hidoi unleashed the lightning jutsu he had used on Kiba, but it was absorbed by the Fox Knight's blade. Suddenly, he found himself thrown against a tree, staring into those blood-red eyes. "Tell me your secrets. Now." The Fox Knight's eyes bored into Hidoi's mind, reading everything from the fact that he had been a bedwetter until he was 12 to his secret ambition of assassinating the Raikage and replacing him. "So, you are a traitor to your Raikage. And you intended to kill the girl so as not to have to take care of her on the way home. Then, it is time for your judgment." The Fox Knight pulled back his left fist, unsheathed the blades in that gauntlet and stabbed forward. He turned away from the dead Jounin and looked at the 5 figures tied up. He cleaned his sword on Kishaku's body and sheathed it before slashing Kiba's and Kurenai's bonds with a kunai knife. Kiba went to Akameru, while Kurenai freed Shino. The Fox Knight turned to Hinata, his eyes becoming a warmer red in their glow. Hinata felt that she should be scared, but instead, she felt drawn to those eyes. There was something almost familiar about them. He cut away the gag, then the ropes. He grabbed her as she fell. Tears welled up in her eyes as the blood began to circulate through her limbs. The Fox Knight lowered her to the ground and began to rub her wrists. She looked at him in gratitude. "Thank, why you?" she whispered. "No problem. I'm glad I was nearby," he said as he moved to her ankles. He rubbed them too before helping her up. The others cautiously approached him. The Fox Knight shook his head. "You have nothing to fear from me unless you betray Konoha or your comrades." Kurenai looked him up and down. "I am thankful for what you did for us here. But I'm afraid your actions are causing problems for our village. Several of the villages whose ninjas you have killed are angry and could attack us." The Fox Knight looked to the sky. After several moments he sighed in frustration. "Even now, my actions still hurt the village. It seems I can do nothing but hurt those I protect." He suddenly pulled a sealed letter from his cloak and handed it to Kurenai. "Give this to your Hokage. It is for her eyes only. Do you understand?" As Kurenai took the letter, the Fox Knight turned and disappeared into the trees. They heard his voice echo from their surroundings. "I will continue to watch you as you journey home. Be careful." Hinata looked out into the woods where their rescuer had disappeared. "Who are you? And why do I feel like I know you?" 2 days later, Team Kurenai reported in. Per the Fox Knight's orders, Kurenai handed the letter to Tsunade as she finished her report. So, you were attacked by Kumo ninjas who were sent to retrieve a Byakugan wielder. And the Fox Knight saved you and gave you this to give to me. As Kurenai nodded, Tsunade opened the letter. Her eyes began to scan it. To the Goddamn Hokage of Konoha from the Fox Knight, Tsunade-sama. It has come to my attention that while I have done no harm to Konoha or its allies, you are not entirely pleased with my actions. I am truly remorse for any trouble I have caused you. If you like, we should meet and talk face to face. I will be waiting in a clearing 2 miles north of town 2 days from now. This is not a trick. I truly wish to speak with you and see how we might resolve our problems. I shall await you, but I will speak with only you. I hope to see you soon. Fox Knight, Shadow Defender of Konoha. Tsunade read the letter a second time before putting it down. She looked up and nodded to Team Kurenai. Thank you for bringing this in. Get yourselves checked out in the hospital, then rest. 2 days from now, we are paying this Fox Knight a visit. Team Kurenai bowed and left. Tsunade pulled one of her hidden bottles of sake out and looked out the window as she slowly drained it. Alright Fox Knight. We'll meet. But I just hope mine and Jiraiya's suspicions of you aren't true. Chapter 3. Tsunade slowly walked through the woods with 4 Anbu escorting her. But she knew others were nearby. She had personally seen to that. Flashback. Tsunade stood in front of the 4 teams of shinobi. Jiraiya stood to her right. Kakashi, Guy, Kurenai and Asuma stood at the ready, their teams behind them. Asuma is still alive, as is Jiraiya. Neither went on the missions that killed them because of Naruto's disappearance and the Fox Knight's appearance. I have received a letter from the mysterious Fox Knight. He wishes to speak to me. This is our one opportunity to capture him and either stop him or rein him in. You all will surround the perimeter and ensure that he does not escape. Understand? As one, the ninjas present nodded their heads. Tsunade sighed. I want no harm done to him unless there is no alternative. Sakura, you know what you need to do. Sakura nodded and gently patted her weapons pouch. I understand. Tsunade sighed. This man is extremely dangerous. If he should decide to fight, then use all your force to stop him. Flashback ends. Tsunade slowly approached the clearing. The Anbu stopped at the edge of the clearing. Tsunade slowly entered it and looked around. It was the time, date and place. But there was no one there. Hello? Is the Fox Knight here? I am Tsunade Senju, Goddamn Hokage of Konoha. I know who you are. A deep growling voice echoed from the woods. Suddenly, the cloaked figure of the Fox Knight seemed to grow from the ground. Tsunade stepped back, amazed that he had gotten so close without being detected. The cloaked figure bowed. Tsunade tried to see his face as he raised his head. But the shadow of his hood hid his eyes and the face mask covered his chin to his nose. She shook her head. Why do you wear that hood and mask? It must be extremely hot. Why not remove it? I prefer to keep my identity a secret. I hope you understand. Tsunade sighed as she nodded. Very well. So, let's talk. Indeed. The Fox Knight performed a few hand signs. The Anbu hopped out of the woods only to see 2 chairs of earth form from the ground. The Fox Knight looked at them. I see you decided to bring backup. Do you believe me to be a threat? Tsunade sighed. It was necessary because of my position. Please, do not mind them. The Fox Knight nodded. What about the other ninjas around us? Do they mean me harm? Tsunade's eyes widened. What? I've spent nearly 4 months in these woods, training my senses and abilities. There are 4 ninjas to the north, 3 to the west, 4 to the east, and another 4 to south. Then, there is your 4 Anbu and a dozen other ninja to the far south, waiting as reinforcements. And that's only what I'm sensing while looking for chakra. Tsunade sighed. Very well. Both of them sat down and Tsunade got straight to business. We need to talk about your actions. While they have been beneficial to Konoha, it has caused serious problems with those whose ninjas you have killed. If your actions continue, you could cause the 4th Shinobi War and Konoha may suffer greatly. The Fox Knight sighed and looked down. No matter what I do, I fail those I have sworn to protect. I am a failure, no matter what. As Tsunade looked at him questioningly, he looked up at the sky and spoke sadly. I just wanted to help. I just wanted to have a purpose. But everything I do hurts those I want to protect. Slowly, he stood to his feet and sighed. I'll turn myself in. Just promise me one thing. I want to walk back into my hometown and look at it with my own eyes. Tsunade looked him over as the other ninjas approached. Sakura came up next to the Fox Knight. Tsunade sighed and gently nodded. I will accept your surrender. But I can't let you come back conscious. This is to ensure that you don't escape. Sakura suddenly plunged a syringe into the Fox Knight's arm. He glanced down at it, then up at Sakura. She gasped and backed away. The Fox Knight turned to Tsunade and she saw his eyes. They weren't the red that she had expected. Instead, they were a vivid blue. Slowly, he spoke in a voice she hadn't heard in 4 months. Bachan. I should have known better. he whispered, his eyes full of pain and hurt. Then, those eyes closed and he slowly fell to the ground. As he did, his hood fell back. Tsunade rushed to his side and gasped at the sight of the long, spiky blonde hair and the two golden fox ears. Shaking, she slowly removed the mask, revealing the whisker marks and the face of Naruto Uzumaki. "Naruto," she whispered. "It was you all along." She looked up at the Anbu. "Get him home, but cover his head. I want him in the security room of the Hokage Tower. Move." They nodded and one moved the hood and face mask back into position. Another tied him up and all four picked him up. Tsunade turned to the others, who were in various states of shock. Sakura was pale, Kakashi's eye followed the Anbu carrying Naruto. With Team Kurenai, a certain opal-eyed girl had stood there, stock still. Then, she fainted, barely being caught by Kiba. Tsunade approached the security room of the Hokage's tower, where high-level political prisoners were kept. It had a chakra-suppressing seal on the ground, as well as chains that were made to withstand even Tsunade's extreme strength. She nodded at the four Anbu outside the steel door, and one opened it for her. She slowly entered the room, and the door was closed behind her. Naruto's cloak, face mask, claw gauntlets and sword had been removed, as had the 20 kunai, 45 shurikens, and 10 explosive notes he had been carrying. Without the cloak and mask, Tsunade could see that Naruto had undergone some changes. His ears had changed into two gold-furred ears. A gold-furred tail came out of the seat of his pants. Naruto now wore a gray t-shirt with his famous red swirl on it. He wore black pants and boots. His pants had been modified so that he could get them on over his tail and let it hang freely. Can't think of a way to describe it, so bear with me. He slowly looked up, his ears twitching. As his eyes met hers, she cringed. Once, those blue's eyes were filled with laughter and determination. Now, they were cool and revealed nothing. Well. To what do I owe the honor of being visited by the Hokage? Tsunade sighed. I'm here to try and find out what happened to you. Why you disappeared. Why you didn't come back. Why the special treatment? Shouldn't Ibiki-san or Anko-sama be doing this? Naruto gave her an icy version of his smile. Naruto, please. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Naruto's smile disappeared. Hard? Yeah, what do you know about hard? Tsunade looked at him, her anger slowly rising. I know plenty about life being hard. Yeah, right. You lost your little brother and your love. Then you ran off, got drunk, and lost tons of money doing what you love to do. That's real hard, being able to do what you want without having any responsibilities. Naruto watched her with eyes colder than any had ever seen. Look at me. Look at what has happened to me. I've spent 12 years of my life being yelled at, beaten almost to death, being ignored, and having no one. I had to teach myself everything that kids learn from their parents. Then, after I get out of the academy and learn about my roommate, I spent a few months happy to have people who I thought cared about me. It turns out that the man I treated like a brother betrayed me and tried to kill me. The girl who I devoted my life to treated me like dirt and beat me on a regular basis. My sensei tossed me aside to teach that team everything. My so-called friends laughed at me, insulted me, and beat me down on a regular basis. The village I have defended with my life and that I have saved more times than I can remember, they treat me like I am nothing. And that stupid pervert. In all the time we were training, I thought I was becoming stronger. But when I come back, I find out I'm weaker than Ino. All he did was give some stupid training routine and then go off and peek at girls. He lowered his head, his eyes starting to leak tears. Out of a village of thousands, there are only 5 people I can count on. 5. Haruka has treated me like a son ever since he truly realized what my life has been like. Rock Lee views me as someone to keep him going, a worthy rival. Tucci and AM, the people who own the raiment stand. Even though they knew about Kyuubi, they treated me like family and never turned me away. And Hinata Hyuga has always been there for me. She's never stopped being there for me. He raised his head and stared at Tsunade. His face was filled with both pain and anger. I'm going to lose them now. I'm going to have nothing again. Because I'm a monster. Because I am a Hanyu. Nobody wants a demon around. Naruto. Tsunade said softly. What did I do? What did I do to deserve all this? What did I do? He screamed at the ceiling before he lowered his head again. When he raised it, his eyes were icy again. Just go. Sign your orders and have me imprisoned or executed. I don't care anymore. Tsunade looked at him for several minutes. Gone was that eager boy who had told her he would be Hokage, who filled her life with laughter even as he insulted her and she would punch him. The man in front of her believed his life was pointless, that nobody wanted him. She turned away and exited the room. The Anbu locked the door as Tsunade slowly walked up to her office. She sat in her chair as she slowly realized the truth. Naruto was right. Even she had treated him with indifference when he was the one responsible for bringing her back. All she had done was place him on boring assignments and berated him on his lack of success in most missions. She had always thought of him like a little brother, but had she ever shown him that? She started to cry as the sad truth sunk into her mind. He was the greatest hero this village could ever ask for. And in return, he had been treated crueler than any criminal ever could be. Shizune knocked on the door and Tsunade immediately cleared her eyes. Yes. Tsunade-sama. Is everything alright? Why yes. Everything is fine. Tsunade said as she looked away from Shizune. When she turned around, Tsunade's eyes were filled with a sudden fire of purpose. Shizune, I need you to do something for me. Yes. I want you to go and get me everything on the Namikaze family and Kushina Uzumaki. Then, I want you to take a team of shinobi and clean up Minato and Kushina's old home. Make sure everything is ready. I think it is time this village understood who exactly they have been abusing all these years. Shizune nodded and left. Tsunade looked down at her paperwork and starting attacking it with a vengeance. Suddenly, there was another knock on the door. Who is it? She snapped, not really feeling like talking to anyone else. The door hesitantly opened to reveal Hinata Hyuga. Oh, Hinata. Sorry about that. It's alright, Hokage-sama. She entered the room and closed the door before approaching Tsunade's desk. Hokage-sama. I was wondering, what are you planning to do to Naruto-kun? Tsunade looked at her for a moment. I honestly don't know. I want to just let him go and have things back to the way they were. But the elders will probably want his head and Danzu will want him as a weapon. And with the way he is right now, he would probably join Danzu and Anburut. Hinata gave her a look of surprise. Is something wrong with him? Tsunade sighed. He's like a completely different person. He doesn't care if he lives or dies. I really don't know what to do. The blonde Sannin looked at the Hyuga heiress. Maybe you should talk to him. I think he could use your company right now. And out of everyone in the village, I think you could understand him the best right now and know exactly what to say. Hinata blushed, but nodded. Tsunade gave her an authorization form, allowing Hinata to see Naruto. Hinata quickly headed down to the security room and showed her form to the Anbu. They were hesitant at first, but followed orders and opened the door. Naruto looked up, expecting to see an interrogator or one of the elders or Danzu. But when he saw Hinata, his eyes widened. As she entered, Naruto immediately lowered his head. Hinata. What are you doing here? Hinata hung back, hesitant to approach. She felt her old nervousness about being near Naruto come over her. Naruto noticed her hanging back and misunderstood her actions. It's alright. I know that I'm a monster. You don't need to come near me. He said, trying his best to hold back his tears. Hinata gasped as she realized what Naruto must have thought. She felt horrible, seeing him like this. She moved forward, taking small steps, but not faltering. She knelt by Naruto and slowly raised his head, blushing as she touched his chin. Naruto looked up in amazement at Hinata as she gently pulled his head up. She was blushing like crazy, but she seemed determined to speak. And then Naruto-kun, how could I think the man who saved me was a monster? I couldn't be human if I did. Hinata, look at me. How can you say I'm not a monster? I'm not human. I'm a Hanyu now. He flicked his tail out to show her. She looked down at it, then at his ears, then back at his eyes. Maybe that is your physical appearance. But what are you on the inside? Do you wish to kill me? As Naruto shook his head, Hinata continued. When you killed those men, all those traitors and enemies. Did you enjoy it or did you do it because you felt it was necessary? As Naruto just looked at her, she continued. What about that man? That Jounin who was going to torture Kurenai-sensei. He looked like a man, but he behaved like a monster. You may look like one, but inside, you are still who you are. Naruto looked down. Hi Hinata. Why? Why are you so nice to me? Why do you care so much? Hinata blushed even more, her whole face now red. But she kept going, fighting the urge to poke her fingers together and to not answer. Because you are my inspiration. Whenever I felt like I couldn't do anything, you were always there to help me. Whenever I felt like giving up I thought about how you never backed down. I wanted to become strong so I could thank you. But when you left, I felt that if I wasn't so weak, I could have helped you. But I can't help anyone because I'm weak. Naruto's head snapped up. Who says you're weak? Look at you. You're so strong, stronger than anyone I know. Hinata looked at him in amazement as he went on. Even though Neji tried to kill you, you forgave him and treated him with more respect than he deserved. Even though others would stay as far away from me as possible, you had the courage to treat me with kindness and friendship. Even now, when others would think me a demon, you are here, still offering friendship to me. You have the strength to forgive others, no matter what. You have courage to do what you feel is right. That makes you stronger than anyone, especially me. Hinata slowly began to cry as she saw the old Naruto beginning to flash in his eyes. Naruto-kun, do you believe you are a monster now? Would a monster say things like that? Naruto looked at this young woman who had never turned her back on him, never thought ill of him. She had given him friendship, hope, inspiration. She gave everything he ever needed to him. And no, she was here, trying to show him that he was still human. Why is she willing to do so much for me? And then it clicked. It had taken him about 8 years for it all to click. Hinata-chan. Do you like me? Hinata suddenly looked up, her face a red never before seen. It was taking all her willpower not to faint. She just looked, unable to do anything because she might faint. But Naruto saw the truth in her eyes. It was more than like. Hinata-chan, you love me? Hinata, barely able to keep her consciousness, slowly nodded before falling over. Naruto's tail flicked out and cushioned her head as she fell. He just looked at her. She loves me. But I don't know what love is. But as he looked at her, he began to notice her. He had seen her before. She was pretty but was always so quiet and shy. He had never really given her any thought outside that of friendship. But now, he saw that she was just as beautiful, if not even more so than Sakura ever was. And she was so kind, so sweet. Naruto felt something filling him. It was a feeling, like what he had felt for Sakura. But this was more. It was 100 times more. Is this love? I don't know. He just stared at Hinata as his tail slowly moved out from behind her head and slowly stroked her head. She smiled softly and then hugged his tail and snuggled against it. He smiled, a small happy smile, the first he had worn in a long time. Suddenly the door was thrust open and Hiashi stood there, his eyes blazing in anger. Hinata was awakened by the noise and looked at the door. Her eyes widened in fear. Hiashi strolled forward and suddenly struck her aside. He stood before Naruto. You stay away from her, you demon scum. Then he punched Naruto in the stomach. Naruto bowed over, coughing up blood. Hinata looked at her father in fear as he turned to her. You dare to even be near this scum. You are a shame to the Hyuga line. I'm going to take you back to estate and have the caged bird seal put on you. He reached out to grab her, only to have his hand stopped. He couldn't move at all. Behind him, he could feel a massive surge of chakra as the seal shattered beneath him. The 4 Anbu outside the door cowered as they felt the smothering chakra. Suddenly, Hiashi felt himself being yanked around and brought before the now freed prisoner. He suddenly was looking into blood-red eyes. The pupils were black crosses, which had rotated to become 2x. You dare hurt someone so innocent, pure, and kind. Your soul is tainted by a lust for power, and you ignore that which is truly important. Now, tell me all your secrets. Hiashi felt his mind being probed, read like an open book. All his secrets, his plans, all of it was laid bare before this man. Finally, he was released and he fell to the ground. Naruto's pupils had become crosses again. Your secrets have been revealed to me. You never had any intention of making Hinata heiress. Once you had a reason to, you would have put her in the branch family. Hinata, he has no love or respect for you. He has kept you downtrodden because he fears what you can do to the clan if you become heir. Hinata looked at her father, who was quivering on the floor. Slowly, she stood up and approached Naruto, whose eyes had returned to normal. She was amazed to see the seal on the ground was cracked and the chains had been melted by the force of chakra Naruto had unleashed. Suddenly, the 4 Anbu outside the door rushed in, having recovered from feeling the surge of chakra. They had drawn weapons, ready to fight. Hinata moved in front of Naruto to block them. Lady Hinata, please step aside. We must restrain him. Hinata shook her head. He was protecting me. I won't let you hurt him. Naruto slowly moved past her as the Anbu tightened their grips on their weapons. Hinata-chan, don't. I don't want you getting into trouble over me. Tsunade rushed in and pushed her way past the guards. What happened here? She yelled as she saw Naruto freed from his bonds and Hiashi slowly rising off the floor. That scum. He attacked me. I came here to retrieve my daughter and he used that demonic chakra to break loose and attack me. He's brainwashed my daughter. Liar. You came here to drag your daughter away and put her in the branch family of the Hyuga clan. You came in here, struck her, then punched me while I was still chained up. Then when you threatened Hinata-chan, I broke loose and learned the secrets of your mind. You don't want her to be the head of your clan because you know she will bond main and branch families together and get rid of the bird seal. Tsunade looked from one to the other. Then she noticed the welt rising on Hinata's cheek. She slowly nodded, then turned to Naruto. How do you know all that? It's my eyes. When Kyuubi and me unwillingly merged, he didn't just heighten my senses. He gave me a special gift to use. I can read a person's mind, no matter how well guarded it may be. It's how I sniffed out traitors and learned enemy secrets. Tsunade looked at him in surprise. She stared at the shattered seal, the melted chains, the way Naruto stood protectively in front of Hinata and came to a conclusion. My office. We need to have a talk. Chapter 4. AN. I used all my creativeness on chapter titles in Rebirth of Legends. 6 of the Anbu Black Ops stood against the wall of Tsunade's office in case Naruto tried anything. But the only thing he seemed concerned about doing was keeping Hiashi away from Hinata. He sat in between them, which caused Hiashi to scoot his chair away from him. Tsunade sat down behind her desk and looked over them. She leaned her elbows on the desk and rested her head on the entwined fingers of her hands. Before we discuss what happened down there, I think it is time we understood exactly what happened to you, Naruto. So please, tell us what happened. Why did you disappear? Naruto sighed before beginning. Well, I guess where I need to start is with a mission we went on to meet Sasori's spy. You remember that, don't you? Tsunade nodded. After Sakura and the elder of Suna, Chiyo, had defeated the Akatsuki puppet master, he had told them he was meeting a spy he had in Orochimaru's network. They had met with spy, discovered it was Kabuto, only to find themselves in an ambush meant for Sasori. In the end, they had found Orochimaru's nearby lair and Danzu's attempt to ally himself with Orochimaru. Unfortunately, since they had no hard proof, they couldn't arrest him on charges of treason. Naruto continued. Well, Kyuubi wanted out to fight against Sasuke. But I wouldn't let him. While I was distracted, Sasuke used his Sharingan to enter my mind and he somehow dispelled the Kyuubi. Whatever he did, it triggered something. He reached down to touch his seal over under his shirt. It triggered Kyuubi's chakra in a way that it automatically began to merge our DNA. I didn't know about it until a week later. That was when my chakra and Kyuubi's started acting up. I felt these chakra pulses and like my insides were melting. I figured I should get out of the village in case something happened. That's why I left. He looked down, the memories floating over him. It wasn't pleasant. Flashback. Naruto grabbed his stomach as the pain continued to wash over him. He clawed at his clothes and the ground, trying to get rid of the pain washing over him as he rolled around on the ground. His headband fell off as two golden fox ears pushed it off his head. The seat of his pants ripped as a bushy golden fox tail came out. Just as suddenly, the pain stopped. Naruto lay on the ground, panting. Eventually, he raised his head and saw his headband. He reached out for it and just as he was about to grab it, he caught his reflection in it. He stopped as he saw the fox ears on his head. He gently touched them, then, he reached behind him, feeling the strange extension of his body. He widened and pulled the fox tail around to look at it. No. No, no, no. What has happened to me? In fear and anger, he started to scream and rage. He went on a rampage through the clearing, destroying trees and bushes. Finally, he dropped in exhaustion. Kyuubi, what did you do to me? Nothing, you stupid mortal. I did nothing. It was that stupid Ichiha. Naruto shuddered as tears formed in his eyes, his mind focusing on one thing. I'm a monster. I can't go home. I can't go home like this. No one would want me. Naruto stumbled to his feet and ran. Flashback ends. I ran away after that. I figured that no one would want me around anymore and so I just ran. Eventually, I found myself near a small village at the border. I approached a hut at the outskirts and fell asleep nearby. I was discovered by the old man who lived there. He looked off into space. Hinata gently squeezed his arm, much to Hiashi's anger. Naruto smiled at her before continuing. I thought he was going to kill me. Instead, he brought me into the hut and cared for me. When I asked him why, he told me that he knew the difference between a demon and a Jinchuriki. He told me that since I was obviously not an evil Jinchuriki, bent on destroying others, he would help me. Tsunade nodded. Who was he? I'm not sure. He just called himself Kageba, an ex-ninja from the extinct Yuzugakure no Sado. He taught me a few things about Kenjutsu, tracking, and a few other types of weapon-styled fighting. He gave me my cloak and the weapons I call my fox claw gauntlets, then helped me forge my katana. Once that was done, he helped me create my own style of Kenjutsu, known as Katana no Kitsune Bibu. The blade of the fox tail. Naruto smiled slightly. The Kyuubi complained and threatened me for a while during my training. Eventually, when he realized that he was never getting out and never going to be able to take me over, he decided to at least make sure he lived for a while by making sure I was as strong as possible. So, he told me exactly what I can do now that I was a Hanyu. After that, he became silent. I haven't heard from him since, but I know he is still there. Naruto slowly stood up. The merger made me stronger and faster. My senses have been increased to the level of a fox. I also gained Kyuubi's knowledge, which mostly covered all the jutsus of the people he has faced against. Lastly, I gained his own unique ability, the Kitsunegan or fox eyes. They allow me to read a person's mind and as I recently discovered, I can even begin to destroy a person's mind. He noticed the sudden glint in Tsunade's eyes. It's not a Kekai Genkai or something that can be taught. It is only available to me because I have Kyuubi in me. Even any kids I have will not receive this ability. Naruto activated his eyes and looked at one of the Anbu. That man secretly writes poetry when no one is around. The Anbu started as the others shook as they silently suppressed their laughter. Tsunade did laugh, but then sighed in disappointment at the lack of duplicating this ability and sat back. Well, that's a shame. Keep going. Naruto nodded. During my training, me and Kage stumbled upon some Iwa ninjas, meeting with the Chunin and Yajirobe. We overheard their conversation and I realized that Yajirobe was a spy. Me and Kage followed the Iwa ninjas after that and slaughtered them so they couldn't report what they had been told. Then, I took care of Yajirobe, as I'm sure you remember. As Tsunade nodded, Naruto sat back down. It was then that I came up with a new purpose for myself. I knew I would never be able to be Hokage or even a ninja in Konoha. So, I decided to serve the village by protecting it from the outside while dealing with traitors and enemy spies that I discovered on the inside. Tsunade nodded. Well, then it seems you have been doing the village a great service. But he is a rogue ninja. He should have been killed as soon as he was captured. And he attacked me in the security room. Hiashi screamed as he rose to his feet. Tsunade looked at him, cold anger all over her face. I would not be telling me my job if I were you, Hiashi. It would seem to me by Naruto's demonstration that his story of what happened down there is the more plausible of the two. Especially since he has the backing of an eyewitness while you only have your own word. And if Naruto's accusation of your intentions is true, then your word does not mean much. You dare insult me? I am Hiashi Hyuga, head of the most powerful ninja clan in Konoha. Naruto snorted at this. Once, maybe. But Kyuubi remembers fighting the Hyugas in the old days. Even the weakest of them would put you to shame. Hiashi snarled and struck at Naruto. Naruto moved his head to one side and grabbed Hiashi's wrist. I wouldn't if I was you. I could break the bones in your wrist until they were nothing but dust. He applied a little pressure and Hiashi fell to his knees in pain. Naruto. Well, I wouldn't mind his arrogance taken down a few notches, it would only worsen your situation. Tsunade said. Naruto hesitated in complying, only to be stopped by a gentle hand on his. Hinata gently squeezed his hand and whispered, he's not worth it, Naruto-kun. Naruto turned to see Hinata blushing but staring steadfastly at Naruto. He released Hiashi's wrist and sat back down, with Hinata keeping her hand on his. Tsunade sighed. Naruto, as it stands, you are an S-ranked missing nin. But there are some mitigating circumstances. The fact that you have been aiding Konoha is one. But the others are these. She held up a massive folder and a much thinner one. These are the reports on the Namikaze family, who were among our strongest ninjas in their day, but not numerous enough to be a clan. I'm sure you know about Minato Namikaze, the Yondaime Hokage. Naruto nodded. He knew all about the fourth. He had been his role model. When he had learned about the truth that the Yondaime had sealed Kyuubi in him, he had been furious. But then, as he thought it over, he realized that the Yondaime had no choice and accepted the fact. Tsunade sighed. Well, Minato, before he became Hokage, went on a mission to Yuzu. There, he met a female jounin named Kushina Uzumaki. Naruto and Hinata stiffened as they recognized the last name. Hiashi, who was cradling his wrist, looked up in astonishment. Tsunade nodded at their reactions. The two worked together and by the time the mission was over, they had fallen in love. Kushina came back to Konoha and married Minato. A few years later, Yuzu was wiped out by Iwa. That was part of the reason that Minato was especially vicious in combat towards Iwa ninjas. After the war, Kushina was pregnant with their first child. Naruto was leaning forward, all his attention directed at Tsunade. Hinata was gripping his arm. Hiashi's eyes were narrowed. On October 10th, about 16 years ago, Kushina went into labor. That night, Kyuubi attacked Konoha. Minato stayed with his wife as complications arose. She gave birth but died of blood loss. Minato, racked in grief, went with their newborn child and faced the Kyuubi. He used the Shiki Fuijin Jutsu to stop the Kyuubi and then used a Haki no Fuin Shiki sealing Jutsu to seal the Kyuubi inside his newborn son. That's right. Minato Namikaze used two separate jutsus to take care of Kyuubi. Dude had a lot of strength to be able to pull both of them off. By the way, the first one was the Reaper Death Seal, used by Sarutobi against Orochimaru. The second is the 8 Divination Seal on Naruto's gut. Naruto jumped up, his seat falling back. His eyes were wide as he just stared at Tsunade. Hinata sat there, unable to move from shock. Hiashi glanced at Naruto, trying to comprehend what he had just heard. "And my father? The Yondaime was my dad." Tsunade nodded softly. Naruto looked down at where the seal was under his shirt. He gently touched that area of his shirt. "My daddy, he did this to me." Naruto just kept looking at his stomach for several minutes. Hinata slowly looked up at him, afraid that he might burst out in anger or something. Then Naruto looked up. "I understand. My dad wouldn't not be willing to ask that which he was not willing to do himself. Even if he had used another child, I still would have been left alone and could have grown up to be like that team, Sasuke Uchiha." He gently sat back down, much to Hinata's and Tsunade's relief. Well, since you are Minato Namikaze's son, you are officially the heir of the Namikaze family and all their capabilities. As such, you are entitled and should have received equal standing to Sasuke Uchiha after his clan was massacred. Since you are the last of a clan or well-respected family, there will be a council meeting to discuss your fate. Until then, you will be allowed to live in the home your parents lived in, but under supervision. Are we clear? Naruto nodded while Hiashi just looked away in disgust. Hinata happily took Naruto's hand and squeezed it. Tsunade sighed and sat back. Now, about what you told me involving Hinata. That is Hyuga clan business and does not concern the Hokage. Hiashi proclaimed, his arrogance returning. Tsunade turned to look at him, her eyes once again cold with anger. Hiashi, it involves one of the ninjas under my command. I think it does concern me. The Hokage will not interfere with a clan's traditions and concerns unless it interferes with the workings of the village. That is one of the laws put down by the Shadame himself when he founded Konoha. Hiashi smiled smugly. Tsunade sighed in defeat, but Naruto's eyes suddenly widened. He leaned over and whispered into Hinata's ear. Hiashi turned to them in anger. Get away from her. You may be Minato's son, but that doesn't give you the right to be so familiar with my daughter. Naruto turned and bowed his head. You are right, Hiashi-san. Please forgive my impudence. Good. Now come Hinata. We have some ceremonies to perform. Hiashi turned, only to be stopped by the small voice behind him. No. He whirled around to see Hinata standing, her face defiant. He slowly approached her, his face full of anger. What did you say? Hinata looked up at him. I said no. I will give up my position as heiress of the clan. Boo, but I refuse to be placed in the branch family when I have done nothing to deserve it. So, what will you do then? If you will not go through with this, then you must leave the Hyuga clan. Will you give up your name and live in the streets? Give up the power, protection and wealth that the Hyuga clan offers. Hinata stood tall and managed to say without stuttering, I would gladly give all that up. Living in the Hyuga clan is not worth all that it offers. She stared at her father, who looked at her in amazement. From this day forth, I will be Hyuga no longer. Naruto opened the door to what would have been his home had Kyuubi not attacked. He had left the Hokage's office with a key to it, all the information on his parents that he had access to as their son, all his possessions, and a guest. After she had forsaken the Hyuga name, Hinata had gathered her possessions from her old home and had left her old home forever. Naruto, being the person he was, offered to let her stay at his new home as long as she wanted or until his fate was decided. Hinata looked around the comfy-looking apartment. It was so warm and inviting. Pictures and paintings lined the walls. There was a small dining table with cushions around it. Near that was the entrance to the kitchen. On the opposite wall was a small hallway which had 3 doors. Naruto went over to them while Hinata set her stuff on the floor and stood there. She didn't want to disturb anything yet. Naruto opened the first door on his left. It revealed a full bathroom with a shower tub. Naruto nodded and turned to the door opposite. The room behind it was a good-sized bedroom with pale green walls. There was a bed, a dresser, and a closest. Naruto turned to the last door but hesitated. He took a deep breath and opened the door. Inside was his parents' bedroom. A king-size bed stood against the center of the far wall. Pictures dotted the bedside table of a smiling blonde man who stood with a smiling red-haired woman. Some of them had them hugging, others holding each other. Naruto stopped at one in particular. It showed his dad, Minato, hugging a pregnant Kushina from behind. This may be the only picture of all 3 of us. Naruto thought sadly. He wiped away a tear and moved on. He opened the closet and was surprised to find the hangers empty. Then he noticed the recently packed boxes on the ground. One had a note on it. Naruto, these are all your parents' clothes. We thought you might need the closet space, but would want these clothes to remember them by. Shizune. Naruto nodded and closed the closet. He turned to the door next to the closet and discovered a smaller bathroom, but one that still had a shower. Naruto sighed as he looked around his parents' room. This would have been my home if it wasn't for the Kyuubi. He left the room and returned to Hinata, who was still standing there. You didn't have to stay standing, Hinata-chan. You could have sat down. She nodded and sat down on the couch. Naruto sat down next to her. There's a room you can have there. The bathroom's opposite it. Hinata nodded again, blushing. We're sitting down together. I'm sitting on Naruto's couch. Finally, Hinata cleared her throat. Naruto-kun. I in the security room at the Hokage's tower. Did you ask me if I liked you? Naruto nodded. I did. But when you didn't answer, I saw the truth in your eyes. You more than like me, don't you, Hinata-chan? She nodded, her blush increasing. Her secret was out. What would Naruto do? She looked up at him to see him looking at the wall. Hinata-chan, I really care about you. I think you are an incredible person. But I don't know if I love you. She sighed and looked down. I understand. I know that you couldn't want someone like me. I'm not pretty or confident like Sakura is. That's not it at all. Hinata-chan, it's not that I don't love you. It's just that I don't know what love really is. Hinata looked up as Naruto moved closer and took her hand. Hinata-chan, I really like you. Maybe I do love you and don't know it. What I am asking is this. Let's get to really know each other, hang out, maybe even go on a few dates. Would that be okay? Hinata smiled and nodded as some tears began to fall. She hugged Naruto, whispering, I understand. And I promise to help you understand what love is and help you with whatever girl you love. I hope it is me. Naruto smiled and hugged her back, earning a eep from her. Thank you, Hinata-chan. You are always there for me when I need you. I really hope that what I feel for you is love because I want you to be happy. The two of them just stayed like that even as the sun began to set in the distance. Along the Earth-Fire border, a few hundred ninjas were gathering. They were a mixture of Iwa and Kumo shinobi. Both the Tsuchikage and the Reikage had formed a secret force to eradicate the troublesome Fox Knight and Konoha. The ninjas sat around, eating and talking with each other. Their sentries watched the surrounding area with alert eyes. But they failed to see the figure hiding in the trees as it slipped away and headed to the southeast. The figure moved slowly so as not to attract attention. Once he was a safe distance, he picked up speed, heading for Konoha. Naruto, looks like we have a whole mess of trouble. Kushina, your son is quite the handful. The figure spoke to the heavens before disappearing into the woods. Chapter 5. The next day, the elders Kaharu Udatane and Hamura Midokado, along with Danzu, met the Godame Hokage in her office. They all had been informed of the capture of Naruto and were wondering why he hadn't been executed yet. Danzu was personally hoping to use this as an excuse to drag the Jinchuriki into his secret Anbu route and turn him into his own secret weapon. An. For those of you who don't know, the true council of Konoha is made of the two elders and the Hokage. I don't know about Danzu, I guess maybe he is part of it too. The three of them bowed to Tsunade, who bowed her head in return. Please, sit. We have much to discuss. As they did, Kaharu asked what was on their minds. Hokage-sama, we have heard of the capture of the Jinchuriki. What exactly is his fate? Tsunade sighed. That is the purpose of this meeting. There are several circumstances that must be discussed. First off, Naruto Uzumaki actually did surrender of his own free will. This alone shows he has no interest in fighting us. Tsunade pulled out her copies of the reports on the Fox Knight, all of Naruto's missions, and Naruto's true lineage. The other circumstances are these. Naruto Uzumaki, under the alias of the Fox Knight, has been aiding the village by capturing and/or eliminating spies and traitors in Konoha. He has also been wiping out enemy shinobi who were carrying out missions against Konoha and our allies. In that sense, the only true crime he is guilty of is running away. Hamura leaned forward. He was still classified as an S-ranked missing nin. His capture should have led to his immediate execution at the scene or upon his return. Naruto only ran away because he was afraid of something happening involving Kyuubi. He and Kyuubi's DNA was merging, but he didn't know it at the time. Fearing the worst, he left the village in case he should lose control so as to protect the village from Kyuubi. Danzu spoke up. Then why did he not return afterwards? Surely, if Kyuubi has not taken control, then he should have returned afterwards. Tsunade sighed. He feared for his life. His features would make him look more demonic to the villagers and they would have probably tried to kill him. The crippled man nodded. I see. If that is the case, then I do not believe Naruto Uzumaki should be executed. However, he should be given to me so that he can be properly trained as a ninja. Tsunade shook her head. I think not. I won't give that boy over to you so you can turn him into another Gaara. Besides, considering the other circumstances, I believe Naruto should not only be let off, he should be promoted. If I could, I would give him the Hokage's position right now. The hare looked at her in horror. Are you mad giving control of Konoha to the demon? Tsunade turned to the female elder in disgust and anger. You are blinded, just like everyone else. Naruto Uzumaki, until the merger, was human. Even now, he acts more human than half the people in this village. He is a hero, many times over. Tsunade indicated the mission reports. Besides keeping Kyuubi at bay for 16 long years, Naruto also saved the village from Gaara during the Otosuna invasion. Not only that, but Naruto has saved countless other lands, giving Konoha many useful allies. To top it all off, he saved the world from being overrun by a madman who sought an ancient power to pacify the world to his utopia. I'm referring to Naruto movie number 2. I missed the English dubbed version but saw the original with English subtitles. Kaharu and Hamura both shook their heads while Danzu shrugged with his one good shoulder. Well, that may be true, but that doesn't give him immunity from running off and leaving his village. Tsunade stood up, slamming her fist down on the desk, causing it to creak in protest. Damn it. The boy is a hero, but he has been treated in the cruelest and most inhumane ways. I'm surprised he hasn't killed everyone for calling him demon scum. She sat back down and pulled out her trump card. Even if all of that is not enough, there is the last circumstance. His lineage. Hamura scoffed. The boy was an orphan. How could his parents be of any significance? Tsunade smirked. Simple. His father was Minato Namikaze, the Yondaime Hokage of this very village, and the hero who stopped the Kyuubi. They all just sat there, shocked at what had been revealed to them. Danzu recovered first. But how can this be? The boy's surname is Uzumaki. Named after his mother, Kushina Uzumaki, to protect him from Minato's enemies. But this is a birth certificate showing his parents to be the Yondaime and his wife. Not only that, but I ran a DNA comparison of his blood to records of Minato's. He is his son. Besides, how many other people in Konoha have had spiky blonde hair and loved ramen with a passion? Koharu and Hamura looked at each other. Then this does change things. If Naruto is of Namika's blood, he has the potential to become the greatest shinobi in Konoha. Koharu stated in awe. Not only that, but he may be able to revive some of his father's jutsus. He has already mastered the Rasengan and even updated it. Perhaps he can wield the Hiraishin as well. Danzu shook his head. Wait. While I do not wish for the death of this boy, we cannot let him off without some punishment. Tsunade shook her head. If anything, Naruto's life thus far has been his punishment. Naruto should have been given the same care and respect Sasuke Uchiha was shown. I think that the circumstances at hand means Naruto as Naruto Namikaze should be allowed to rejoin the shinobi force and be given a proper rank. Koharu and Hamura looked at each other. Truth be told, they had no love for Naruto or the Namikaze name. All they believed was that Naruto either was a threat or an asset. Now that he was the son of one of the most powerful shinobi that Konoha had even known, he was an asset. Eventually, they both nodded. I agree. Naruto Namikaze has been punished enough through his life. As long as he publicly swears his allegiance to Konoha, then we have no problems with him being reinstated and promoted to a proper rank. Be warned though, Tsunade-sama. If Naruto turns against the village, he will be destroyed. Tsunade nodded, internally smirking at the fury on Danzu's face. I'll inform him immediately. Hinata walked along the streets of Konoha, a couple of grocery bags in her arms. Naruto had noticed that while the kitchen had been stocked with a balance of healthy and his favorite foods, there were none of Hinata's favorite things there. He had wanted to go out with her and get the food, but the Anbu who was watching the house had advised against Naruto going out at the moment. Hinata had said it wasn't a problem, but Naruto insisted that this should be as much her place as it was his. So, she had gone food shopping and had bought cinnamon rolls, her favorite flavors of tea, and a few other things. She smiled happily as she walked down the street. After they had hugged, she and Naruto had stayed up late, talking with each other. There was little she didn't know about him, but he had still surprised her with a few things. He apparently had a fascination with gardening, which she didn't know about. She smiled at the thought. Maybe we could have a garden together. Hey Hinata. A loud voice rang out behind her. She turned to see Kiba, Akamaru, and Shino approaching. Hinata, what's going on? We went to your own to look for you, only to be told you don't live there anymore. What happened? Hinata smiled softly. Sorry, Kiba-kun. I didn't have a chance to come tell you too. I renounced my name yesterday. Kiba's mouth fell open, while Shino merely arched an eyebrow, the Aburum's gesture of astonishment. Kiba finally managed to close his mouth. What? You mean? Hinata nodded. I left the Hyuga home because it turns out that my father didn't care about me. I only stayed in hopes of earning his respect and maybe one day changing our clan. But since that won't happen, I didn't see any point in staying somewhere that I wasn't loved and appreciated. Shino nodded. That makes sense. But where are you staying now? Obviously it is with someone, as you are not carrying enough food to last you more than a week or two. Hinata gave another small smile, as her blush slowly began. I am staying with Naruto-kun. He helped me out with my male parent. Afterwards, he offered to let me stay at his new home. Kiba looked at her in amazement. Hinata, are you sure that's safe? I mean, yeah it's Naruto, and we owe him our lives, but you saw what he did to those guys. And he's not exactly human anymore, is he? Hinata's attitude turned cold towards Kiba. Naruto-kun has suffered greatly throughout his life and has always managed to bear through it with a smile on his face, even if it is a false one. He cares nothing for himself, only for those he holds precious. And if anything, I think Naruto-kun being a Hanyu makes him even stronger and better suited to one day serve Konoha as its Hokage. I gladly trust him with my life and am very happy that he has offered to let me live with him. I think you should reconsider your views about Naruto-kun, Kiba-san. Kiba winced at the honorific as Hinata turned and walked away. Shino shook his head. Hinata is right, Kiba. Naruto has always defended us without a thought for his own safety. Even after becoming a Hanyu, his only thoughts were helping Konoha and protecting us. Kiba sighed. Fine, I know when I'm beat. I guess I need to apologize to Hinata and Naruto when I get a chance. Shino nodded. Yes, you do. But for now, we must inform Kurenai-sensei of Hinata's new living arrangements. The two Chunin walked away, with Akamaru happily sniffing at everything new he found. Naruto sat on his couch, his tail twitching every now and then, his ears turning to hear every new noise. He was looking at the picture of his mom and dad at their wedding day. Both were smiling happily, his mom radiant in her wedding kimono, his dad smiling the biggest smile ever. Dad, I can understand what you did. But, I don't know what to think. It was for the good of Konoha, but I was condemned to a living hell. Can I ever really forgive you for that? Naruto sighed and put the picture had been given a rotten hand in life, but it had made him the man he was. He would never had become the determined, doggedly loyal person he was if he didn't have so much against him. But he had grown up alone and not knowing so many things. Maybe he might have known what love was and seen Hinata sooner if he had grown up with a family. But still, there was no use crying about the past. Now, he had to face the future and just hope that everything worked out. He heard the door open and he turned around, a smile on his face. Hinata smiled back as she placed the key she had been given back in her pocket. She closed the door and locked it before going to place her bags on the kitchen counter. Naruto came over and hugged her in a friendly way. Hey there. Everything go okay? Hinata nodded. Yeah. I ran into Kiba-kun and Shino-kun and we talked a little. She began to pack the items away. So, any word from the Hokage-sama? Naruto shook his head. Nope. Old Bachan is taking her time. Hinata glanced at Naruto. Why do you call her that? It doesn't seem very respectful. Naruto smiled. It's sorta my way of showing respect. I did the same thing with the Sandaime. It's my way of showing respect by calling them by what I really see instead of giving them respect for only a position. I guess it can be a fault of mine. Hinata shook her head. No. It just means that you are completely honest. I really like that about you. Naruto smiled and hugged her again. Hinata blushed, but she smiled happily. Naruto may not have actually said he loved her, but he was very affectionate to her. Hinata loved it. Naruto pulled back and let her finish putting away her items. He went and sat down on the couch, looking over a scroll he had found in his parents' room. It was a jutsu scroll of a very famous jutsu. Hinata came over and looked at it. Her eyes widened. The Higuration. Naruto-kun, are you? I am. This was my father's legacy. If I can learn it, I can better protect you and everyone I care about. Hinata looked over the scroll again. It's so complicated. It's almost impossible. Naruto shook his head. Nothing is impossible. Besides, I think I've noticed something. Think about the substitution or Shushin jutsus. Hinata looked at the scroll again. It's similar, but there are still so many other things to it. Naruto nodded. Yeah. Those jutsus were the very base of the foundation. But it may not be as complicated as it is. Some of this does seem unnecessary. Maybe some of it is false to throw someone off. Hinata raised an eyebrow. Maybe. Some of this does seem unnecessary. Naruto sighed and took a few notes. He looked over the scroll again while Hinata headed to her room. She had barely been in there for a few minutes when she heard a aha behind her. She rushed back out. Naruto-kun, what is it? Naruto looked up, a big grin on his face. I think I've got it. It's not just a substitution jutsu. It's a time alteration jutsu. Hinata looked at his notes. What do you mean? Naruto indicated the notes. Look. It's like you open a rift where time moves slower around you. The kunai knives, with the seals. They act as anchor points for these rifts in time. Basically, you are moving normally in a rift in time, but to everyone else, you are moving incredibly fast. Hinata looked at the scroll. She ignored the extra parts and concentrated on the main parts. Suddenly, it clicked. You're right. It's unbelievable. Naruto nodded. It is. But this is just the beginning. It still will take a crazy amount of chakra and focus to pull this off. It's not easy to open a rift in time and not do anything to screw time up. But it's a start. Hinata smiled and hugged Naruto. I knew that you could do it. But I didn't expect it to be this fast. Were you holding back in the academy? Naruto shook his head. No. I'm still that dense baka. But when you have the knowledge of a millennium's old demon fox, you tend to be more intelligent about things. Now emotions and people, there I'm still lacking any real knowledge and experience. Hinata pulled Naruto closer to her. I'll help you understand. I'll help you with anything you want. Naruto smiled. So, when I'm finally released from this house arrest and provided I'm not going to prison or the executioner's block, you want to go have dinner together. Hinata blushed, but less so than usual. Slowly, Naruto was bringing her out of her shell. She nodded. I would love to. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. Naruto sighed and got up and went to the door. Who is it? Bear. Naruto created a shadow clone who opened the door. The Anbu who had been watching them was standing there. "The Hokage-sama requests your presence. The council has come to a decision." Naruto nodded and turned to Hinata, who had joined him. "You want to come along?" When she nodded, Naruto smiled and picked up a black cloak and cloth face mask. He slipped them on, hiding his identity. Then he offered his arm to Hinata. "Shall we go?" Hinata accepted his arm, smiling the whole time as they left. Tsunade sat back, smiling. In the end, the council had not been a problem. Now, hopefully, Naruto would start getting the respect he deserved. At that moment, Shizune opened the office door. "Tsunade-sama, they are here." As Tsunade nodded, a black-cloaked figure entered, followed by Hinata. Both of them bowed to her. "Naruto, I have good news. The council, by a 3-to-1 vote, has decided to not only completely pardon you, but also give you the rank of Chunin of Konoha. The council only asks that you publicly swear your allegiance to Konoha." Hinata broke out in a smile, but Naruto's eyes became icy for a moment. "As if my actions were not enough to prove my loyalty. Bachan, I sense that there is a more sinister plot behind this request. If I swear loyalty to Konoha in such a fashion, I'm bound to do whatever Konoha requires of me. Could someone in power not use that oath against me?" Tsunade's eyes widened. "You're right. I didn't even think about that. But what can we do about it?" Naruto thought for a moment. "Perhaps there is a way around it. I can still remain loyal to the village, but not be bound to follow anyone's orders but yours." Tsunade nodded. "Very well. Tomorrow, I'm calling all of Konoha together to announce the truth about your lineage. At that time, you will make your oath." Then she gave Naruto a smirk. "Since when were you a devious mastermind?" Naruto placed a hand behind his head. "Guess it's the Kitsune in me." He said this with a chuckle. Tsunade nodded. "All right. After tomorrow, you will be free to go about the village. But be careful, Naruto. There are many out there who may not accept you with your new features." Hinata smiled. "I think they make Naruto-kun look intimidating. They are really cute too." She pulled his hood down and began to run a hand over his left ear. Naruto's eyes closed as he enjoyed the rubbing. "Hinata-chan, that feels really good, but we need to get going." After Hinata stopped and Naruto had pulled up his hood and they turned to leave. "See you later, Bachan." Tsunade smiled. "Later, little brother." Naruto stopped and turned, his eyes wide. For a few moments, he looked like he would cry. Then he blinked his eyes and smiled a big smile, his eyes closing as he did. "Little brother. I like the sound of that." Chapter 6. The village of Konoha was abuzz with conversation. The previous day, Tsunade had called for a village-wide meeting to be at the Hokage Tower at 1 p.m. As the time drew near, the civilians and shinobi began to gather at the tower. Many were curious as to what the Hokage wished to tell them. But some of the higher-level ninjas could guess. They knew about the capture of the Fox Knight and they figured this had to do with it. But no one had any idea of the true nature of this announcement. At the top of the tower, Tsunade and the council stood, waiting for the village to assemble. Nearby, the Fox Knight stood, fully cloaked and armed. He kept his distance from the council, especially from Danzu. They hadn't noticed, simply because they didn't care. Danzu could barely suppress his smirk as the elders had told him of their plan. By having the Fox Knight swear an oath of loyalty to Konoha, they could effectively control him as much as Tsunade could. They could have him molded into a proper asset to Konoha instead of a being out of control shinobi. In the crowd, Hinata had moved to the front of the crowd where she could watch. She found herself standing with the others of the Konoha 11 and their senseis. Kurenai came over to her. "Hinata, Kiba and Shino tell me that you have given up your Hyuga name. Is this true?" Hinata nodded. "I finally had enough when I found out my father would never let me be heiress of the clan. I gave up my name and gained my freedom." Kurenai smiled at her former student. "I'm happy for you. But they also tell me you are living with Naruto now. Is that also true?" Hinata looked into Kurenai's eyes with suspicion. "Please, sensei, don't tell me you think Kiba is right." "Huh? What are you talking about? Kiba?" The dog ninja cringed as he came over. "I kinda thought it was unwise, him being all slaughtering enemies and a Hanyu. But Hinata and Shino both made me realize the truth. I'm really sorry, Hinata. I was being a baka." Hinata smiled. "You're forgiven, Kiba-kun. Just don't let it happen again." "Indeed, or I might have to show you how wrong you are about Naruto." Niji came over with Tenten and Lee. Niji smiled and bowed at his cousin. "Hinata-sama, it is nice to see you again and so happy." "An. I need help." "What are the honorifics for brother and sister?" "I've got one, but I don't know if you use it for both or if there are two different ones." "Please help. I'll give you my world-famous cyber cookies." Hinata giggled. "Niji Nai-san, don't call me that. I'm not part of the Hyuga main family anymore, remember?" Niji nodded. "Very well. Hinata, it's good to see you so happy. So, how's Naruto?" Hinata looked at the top of the tower. He's fine, but we think there is a chance someone is trying to manipulate him. This whole ceremony is to have Naruto-kun swear an oath to Konoha. If that happens, what is to stop others in power from using him? Shikamaru, who had drifted over with Ino and Choji, simply nodded. That makes sense. Tsunade-sama can still command him, but those in power, say the council, could manipulate him. So what are you guys going to do? Hinata shrugged. Naruto-kun says he has a plan, but he wants to keep it a secret. He hasn't told anyone what he is going to do. Ino smiled. Well, he was the #1 unpredictable ninja. I'm just jealous you got such a hot guy, Hinata. Everyone looked at Ino in surprise. She smirked at all of them. What? He's strong, he can kick some serious ass, he looks just like the yondaime, who was a major hot eye, and he has those cute fox ears and tail. He is hot. They all just stood there looking at her, while Lee and Guy just smiled their blinding, too wide and perfect smiles. Yosh. Ino is correct. Naruto has the flames of youth, which cause him to be one of the greatest ninjas ever. Indeed, my star pupil. We must help him celebrate by inviting him to join us in training. Ai-sensei. Lee. Ai-sensei. Lee. Everyone did the classic and I'm sweat drop as the two green beasts of Konoha hugged, crying rivers of tears before their sunset background. Other ninjas and even the civilians looked at the natural phenomena in awe. At that moment, Tsunade raised her voice up. People and shinobi of Konoha. As they turned their attention to her, she continued. As many of you have heard, a mysterious figure, known as the Fox Knight, had been clearing our home and land of spies, traitors, and enemies. Everyone nodded and some cheered. Tsunade just shook her head. What most of you may not know is that because of this, tensions are now high with 4 of the shinobi countries out there. Kumo, Iwa, Odo, and Aim are all angry with the Fox Knight as he has been decimating their ninja. We were able to talk to him about the situation and he agreed to surrender to us. However, complications have arisen. She turned to the cloaked figure and motioned for him to join them. He came over amidst cheers from the crowd. Tsunade silenced them with a wave of her hands. We have discovered the Fox Knight is actually a ninja from this village. She nodded to Naruto, who lowered his face mask and his hood. Everyone instantly recognized the golden hair, the blue eyes, and then noticed the golden furred Kitsune ears. Almost immediately, boos and jeers could be heard from almost the entire civilian population and a number of the shinobi. Tsunade's anger flared in an instant, causing silence at the massive wave of killer intent coming off the blonde Sannin. You fools. You cheered him only minutes ago, thanking him for the help he has given us. But the moment he reveals himself, you all treat him like dirt. You all sicken me. She yelled at them, only to have Naruto place a restraining hand on her arm. "Ah-chan, let me," he said softly. He stepped forward, looking down on the people of Konoha. I'm not surprised by your reaction. After all, not only am I the demon scum you all have come to hate, but I have even began to look like it, haven't I? But I think you all should listen to what I have to say. He spoke clearly, with a strong, serious voice. Everyone couldn't help but remain silent and listen to it. I have lived amongst you all and have watched each of you. You all have looked at me with anger, disgust, hatred, fear, or just plain ignorance. Why? Simply because you all don't know better. Because it is human nature to hate and fear what they do not understand. Because you are the Kyuubi. One of them shouted and others joined in. Naruto shook his head and waited for the yells to die down. If I was the Kyuubi, then why didn't I just finish what I started? If I was the Kyuubi, why didn't I just destroy this village as soon as I was able to? But no one answered, Naruto continued. The answer is simple. I'm not the Kyuubi. I am his jailer. For all my life, until 4 months ago, I have been keeping Kyuubi from destroying this village. Now, no one ever has to worry about that again. Kyuubi can never attack Konoha because he can never escape me now. He is a part of me, but I am in control. Look at you. You have the Kitsune's features. How can you say you are in control? As more yells erupted, Naruto stiffened, his eyes glazing over for a second. He was suddenly pulled into his Minsky of a dank sower. Before him was the sealed cage of the Kyuubi. The fox's red eyes glared at Naruto. I've had enough. I hate you and will forever hate you. But even amongst Demon Nid, we treat others with far more respect than these foolish humans treat you. What do you want? A medal? No. I want to speak to them. Don't worry, I can't take you over, I can only use the parts of you that you let me have control of. Slowly, Naruto nodded. I understand. He returned to the real world and raised his hands. Listen to me, all of you. As they died down, Naruto continued. There is someone here who wants to speak. Suddenly, Naruto's eyes turned red with slits. When he spoke, his voice was different, deeper, and a whole lot more angry. Foolish mortals. I can't stand the sight of any of you. Everyone cowered as the voice of Kyuubi blasted their eardrums. I cannot tell you all how many times I have wanted to simply kill and eat this boy, my jailer. Do you all know how many times he has come to me and I have begged, tried to deceive, and even ordered him to remove the seal keeping me here? And each time, he has refused and kept me sealed away. I hate him, but I respect his resolve to keep me from continuing what I started doing 16 years ago. You all should be bowing to him, praising him, thanking him on bended knee for protecting you all from me. If the Yondaime knew what you would do to his kid, he would have left with his wife and child and let me kill and eat all of you. Everyone shuddered as Kyuubi continued. This kid has done nothing to deserve what you all have done to him. He has not, nor will he ever be me. Even now, though he is a Hanyu, he is more human than any of you. Be thankful that I cannot control him or use any part of him without his consent. Be warned, I will not tolerate any more abuse towards my vessel. Naruto's eyes faded back to their original blue and Naruto looked over the stunned and terrified crowd. There are those of you here who knew nothing about Kyuubi being in me. Now you know. The Yondaime sealed the Kyuubi inside a newborn infant baby. The only baby born on October 10th. His own son. Some of those present were in shock as they looked behind Naruto towards the mountain head of the fourth. Almost immediately, they could see the resemblance. Others snorted in disbelief. You can't be the Yondaime's son. He died when his parents did. Naruto looked over all of them, then held out his right hand. In it, the Rasengan formed. Many stared at it in awe. Then, the Rasengan expanded and a whistling sound was heard as wind formed around it like shuriken blades. My father created the Rasengan. But it was only the first step. He intended to do what was considered impossible. Add a element jutsu to a chakra manipulation jutsu. More than likely, this, the Rasen Shuriken, the jutsu I came up with, would have been my father's completed jutsu. Thanks to his Hanyu DNA, he can now withstand the crippling power of the Rasen Shuriken, which he came up with using Kyuubi's knowledge. He is not, however, invincible. Just a heck of a lot stronger and smarter in certain areas. As he released it, he looked over the entire population. Who else, but the son of its creator, could complete such a jutsu? Tsunade stepped forward. Even without that, there is documented proof that Naruto Uzumaki is the son of Minato Namikaze and his wife Kushina Uzumaki. Everyone looked at each other, muttering. They had known about Kushina Uzumaki, the jounin from Yuzu. They had also known that she and Minato had been in love and had married. Could it be that this boy was their son? Tsunade smirked. Now, do you all understand? You all have treated the son of one of our most respected heroes like scum. A boy who should have had the same status as Sasuke Uchiha because he came from the Namikaze family was treated lower than scum because of something he had no control over. Now, do you all understand what you have done? There was an increase in the buzz of chatter as people turned to each other, astonished. They began to realize that they had done everything they could to push away or kill one of their most respected hero sons. In turn, they had pampered and praised a boy who had come from a clan known for secrecy and treachery. In the end, the one they considered a monster had stayed loyal, no matter what, while the pampered one had betrayed Konoha and left them. Many slowly realized their sins and became afraid. He now had legal rights to demand any form of punishment of them. Only a few, mainly the Hyuga main family, still muttered demon under their breath. Tsunade nodded. I see you all understand. I think you all should know that when I offered Naruto the chance to choose a fitting punishment, he instead chose not to seek revenge on anyone for what you all did. The crowd looked at the boy, many in a new light. They had made his life a living hell on earth. Now, when he had a chance to punish them for his life full of pain, he chose mercy. Slowly, they bowed their heads, ashamed at what they had done. Tsunade nodded. Good. I have now revoked the Sandaime's law and instituted a new one. From this day forth, any villager or shinobi who is caught abusing Naruto Namikaze or anyone else connected to him by blood or marriage will be sentenced to 5 years hard labor. Anyone caught attacking him or those close to him will be sentenced to death. Most of the people nodded, while the few who held to their demon belief cursed under their breath. Tsunade nodded. Now, besides all the announcing that has been going on, there is another matter of business to attend to. We have discussed it with the council and wish for Naruto Namikaze to be reinstated in the Konoha shinobi force as a chunin. Before it can be official, Naruto must swear an oath of loyalty. The 3 council members smirked. Soon, the jutsus of the Namikaze and the most powerful Jinchuriki would be theirs to control. Naruto turned to Tsunade and said, I learned from my Kinjutsu master of a tradition in Yuzu for swearing loyalty. I think I should honor my mother's heritage by using it. He dropped to one knee and bowed his head while slowly removing his katana and its sheath from his belt. He partially drew the blade and cut open his palm on it, letting some of the blood cover the exposed sword. He then held out the partially sheathed blade with the blood on it. Noble leader, I swear upon my sword Kitsune no Higasha, Fox Guardian, my soul, and my blood that I would be forever loyal to you. Almost immediately, the council lost their smirks. Naruto had sworn loyalty to Tsunade and by extension of her, to Konoha. But this oath stated he was loyal to her. They saw their plan fall apart as Naruto only truly had to answer to Tsunade because of this oath. To you arrogant fans out there, you might recognize this from the second book, Eldest. The Varden's council tried to manipulate Aragorn into swearing allegiance to them by swearing loyalty to the Varden. He in turn swore loyalty to the Varden's leader, putting him out of the council's reach. Tsunade nodded. I accept your oath and gladly assign you the rank of Chunin. Arise Naruto Namikaze, Chunin of Konoha. As Naruto arose and cleaned his own blood from his blade, cheering and clapping arose from the front of the crowd. It slowly spread and soon, almost the entire crowd was clapping and cheering. Naruto smiled as his dream was starting to come true. 2 days after the announcement, a man around 50 years of age approached the gate. He wore a simple black shirt, khaki pants, and shinobi sandals. His hair was gray, with some streaks of red in it. Around his forehead was a battered headband from the extinct Yuzugakura no Seido. He had a katana sheathed at his back, which was completely black, including the blade. The 2 Chunin on guard stopped him. Halt. What is your business here? I have business with your Hokage and Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. It involves a threat to your village. The Chunin looked at each other and nodded. One vanished while the other returned to the guard booth. Within minutes, the Chunin had returned. The Hokage will see you in her office. You will meet Naruto there. The man nodded and moved at an incredible rate for someone his age. Within minutes, he was at the tower. A woman in her 30s, with short raven black hair nodded at him. I'm Shizune, Tsunade-sama's assistant. Please follow me. Shizune led the man up to the Hokage's office and let him in. Inside, Naruto stood in front of Tsunade, who was sitting at her desk. Naruto turned to look at the man who had called for his presence, and his eyes widened. Kage Yaba. It's good to see you again. Naruto came over and shook the man's hand. Tsunade stood up as the man approached and bowed to her. You must be Naruto-sensei while he was in the wild. I wish to thank you for what you did for him. It was no problem. I actually was keeping a promise I made someone. Naruto's eyes widened in amazement. Who? Kage turned to him. Your mom. You see, I was her sensei at one time. Naruto sat down. You knew my mom? Kage nodded. I remember her as a kid. She was one heck of a loud mouth. Always yapping, full of energy. Of course, when it came time to fight, there was no one more dedicated or ferocious. Sounds like you, Naruto. So, what exactly can I do for you? I was told you had information for us. Kage nodded. I have bad news. There is a force of maybe 500 Kumo and Iwa shinobi to the northeast. They could be on their way here or are still awaiting orders to attack. Either way, they will be coming, and soon. Tsunade immediately rose from her desk and ran to the door. Shizune. Get the council and the heads of every ninja clan and family in here, now. Then send out the alert to every ninja from Chunin to Anbu to assemble in front of the tower. I want all civilians to begin packing and move to the shelters. Move. Shizune nodded and ran, as did the guards and every ninja in a 20-block area of the tower, as they had all heard the Hokage's commands. She turned to Kage. How long do we have? If they are moving, I would say 2 days, maybe 3. That's my optimistic guess. In truth, they could be anywhere from half a day to 3 days from here. Tsunade sighed. We'll just have to do what we can. I hope you intend to help us. Of course. I promised Kushina that if she had children and if anything should happen to her, I would look after them for her. Naruto suddenly snapped his fingers. That's why you were so interested in my last name. You realized I was her son. Kage nodded. Yeah. But not the entire reason. I took you in and started training you because you had a hard life. Which reminds me. How's life now? Naruto smiled. Pretty much great. I know about my parents, I've got a great place to live and a wonderful girl who I may be in love with. Kage raised an eyebrow. May be in love with. Naruto looked down. I'm not sure what exactly love is. All I know is that what I feel for Hinata is kinda like the attraction I felt for this one girl, only 100 times more powerful. I really hope it is love because she loves me and I want her to be happy. Kage smiled. Well, from the sound of it, I would say it is love. Just go with your instincts, like in sword training. Remember? Yeah. Too many mind. Mind of sword, mind of enemy, mind of people watching. No mind. I remember sensei. Quote from The Last Samurai. If you haven't seen it, you're either too young or don't know a good samurai movie when you see one. Forget Tom Cruise, concentrate on everything else in it. Shizune rushed in. Tsunade-sama, the heads of the clans, as well as the ninja, have all assembled. The civilians are evacuating to the shelters. Tsunade nodded. Right. Let's get going. She donned her Hokage hat, indicating the importance of what was happening. She headed to the tower roof, followed by the blonde Hanyu and ex-Yuzu Jounin sensei. At the top, Tsunade addressed the gathered ninjas. Ninjas of Konoha. I have received distressing news. Iwa and Kumo have combined forces and have launched a surprise attack against us. Even now, 500 enemy shinobi are ready to attack our village. Will we stand for this? The cry of anger went up as the ninja raised their fists in the air. Konoha was still recovering from the Otosuna invasion of 3 years ago, so their current maximum force of ninjas was 300. With ninjas on mission, the force was roughly over 250. But Konoha was playing defense, which gave them the advantage of the wall and knowledge of the terrain. Tsunade knew that had to do as much as possible to give them every advantage they could. I want everyone skilled in earth-style jutsus to begin construction of a hidden trench around the village, except at the gate. Put spikes in it at every interval. Everyone else, see to the defenses. With a roar, the ninjas leapt away. Naruto turned to Tsunade. Maybe me and Team Kurenai should head out to scout for the enemy. Kage could come with us. Tsunade nodded. Get to it. And little brother. I expect you to come back alive. I can't make you Hokage if you are dead. Naruto nodded. Right, big sis. Then he and Kage disappeared. Tsunade smirked. Finally, the little twerp comes up with a nickname I like. Chapter 7. Team Kurenai, Naruto, and Kage left through the gates, where at least 20 ninjas stood guard. Already, a number of Earth-style users were busy using their jutsus to make a trench surrounding the wall. They nodded to the scout shinobi before returning to work. Kurenai turned to Kage. So, where do we go? Kage pointed to the northwest. That way. Their camp was there, so they should be coming from that way. But we should be careful. They may have pincer forces to form surprise attacks, and we don't want to run into that. They all nodded and leapt into the trees. Above them, a messenger hawk wheeled in a thermal to gain altitude before turning to the southwest, toward Suna. An. If you don't know what a thermal is, how old are you? It is a pillar of heated air that rises from the ground. Birds, especially predatory ones, use them to gain altitude instead of flapping their wings off. Kage led the way, with Kiba behind him. Naruto and Hinata took the middle, with Shino and Kurenai bringing up the rear. Naruto had his hood and face mask were down, so his ears and nose would not be hindered. Hinata glanced at him, watching his ears twitch towards every sound. She thought they were absolutely adorable and felt another urge to stroke them. She shook her head and put her mind back on the mission at hand. She didn't notice the smirk that Naruto had or the knowing smile of her sensei behind her. They traveled all day, stopping briefly to eat lunch. They were moving fast, but not at full speed, so they wouldn't end up running straight into the enemy forces. As night began to fall, they stopped to make camp. Kage looked around the clearing they were in. This is probably our best cover for a while. It's spacious enough for us, but with decent cover. Do any of you sense anything? Shino shook his head. My bug sentries don't feel any enemy chakra. Kiba patted Akamaru's head. We don't smell anyone nearby. Hinata scanned the surrounding area. I don't see anyone, Kage-sama. Naruto shook his head. Nothing but bugs and birds. I don't hear anything. An. Fox ears. Gotta love em. Cute, soft, and practical. Kurenai nodded. Alright. Kiba, Kage, try and see what you can find for dinner. Naruto, Hinata, firewood. Shino and I will set up camp. They immediately separated to their various tasks. Kiba looked over at Kage as they tracked a rabbit. So, you trained Naruto's mom? Yeah. Why do you ask, Kiba-san? Kiba shrugged his shoulders. It's just the guy grew up with no one, you know. He knows who they are, but he doesn't really know anything about them. I was just wondering if you were going to tell him about her, since only you really know about her life before Konoha. Kage nodded. Yeah, I know. It's a shame. After Yuzu fell, I came to the land of fire to find Kushina. By the time I had healed up and made it here, the Kyuubi had attacked and left. I learned about Kushina's death, but never about what happened to any children she had. So, I waited in a nearby town until Naruto stumbled across my little hut, exhausted, and a Hanyu. Why didn't you attack him? From what I've heard, most people would have killed a Hanyu on sight. I won't attack someone who bears me no ill will. When I woke him up, he just told me to kill him. Instead, I talked to him, learned about his past. When I learned of his last name, I knew I could never kill him. So, I started him down the path of getting a new purpose in life. Suddenly, Akamaru leapt forward, flushing 2 rabbits out of a bush. Both Kiba and Kage nailed them with kunais and began to clean the dead animals. But Naruto and Hinata were gathering up firewood from a fallen tree near the camp. Hinata looked over at Naruto, admiring the tip of his tail, which was poking out of the bottom of his cloak. Naruto-kun. Yeah, Hinata-chan. What's it like to be a Hanyu? Naruto sighed and leaned against the tree trunk. I don't know. On the one hand, it's cool. I mean, I have heightened senses. I'm stronger, faster, more agile. Not to mention the Kitsunegan. That is an added bonus. But with all of this comes the hatred and prejudice. He looked down. Most people only look skin deep. They see the whisker marks, the tail, the ears, and automatically assume something is horribly wrong with me, or I'm evil. It's not like that in Konoha anymore, but I can still sense it. Most people now are bowing and being respectful. Several have begged for forgiveness, others have thanked me for my mercy. But I still feel glances of hatred and disgust from some people. I don't ever see it, but I can feel it. Hinata came over and placed a comforting hand on his arm. He looked up and smiled at her. But then, there are people like you, Hinata-chan. People like you, who always try to find the best in a person. He gently pulled her close, causing her to blush. How is it possible? How can someone so kind and caring possible be immortal and not an angel from heaven? Hinata blushed even more and Naruto backed up a little. Sorry. I guess I got carried away. Hinata barely shook her head. It's alright, and Naruto-kun. I really appreciated your kind words. Naruto nodded, smiling again. He let go of her and picked up the pile of wood they had collected. He nodded back to the camp. We should get going. They sat around the campfire, having enjoyed their dinner, which Hinata had prepared with Kage's help. Hinata had blushed at Naruto's praise for the excellent food. Now, she sat near him, her blush having barely faded after being near him for 20 minutes. They were busy talking, sharing stories about what had been going on while Naruto had been away. Naruto was describing this one fight, skipping over the messy details and sticking to the main story when Shino stiffened. Kurenai noticed in an instant. Shino, what is it? Some of my Kikai bugs have sensed intruders, Kurenai-sama. 10 enemies, coming from the west. Hinata activated her Byakuin while Naruto turned his head, his ears straining in the direction Shino had said. After a moment, both of them nodded. Shino-kun is right. They are Iwa shinobi. An advance guard. They are going to scout Konoha before the main force arrives. Kurenai stood up. We should break camp and get out of here. Naruto shook his head. It won't do any good. They'll know we were here. Our best bet is to hide nearby and wipe them out when they come. Kage nodded. I agree. Me and Naruto can take out several of them before they know what is happening. It will also help leave the enemy blind. Kurenai sighed. Fine. Everyone, fall back. They doused the fire and spread out into the surrounding area. 10 minutes later, 10 Iwa ninjas dropped into the camp. Their leader turned to 2 of them. Search the tents. If anyone is in there, kill them. The rest of you, keep your eyes opened. The 2 ninjas opened the tent flaps and quickly stabbed the empty sleeping bags, checking them for enemies. Then they turned around to the leader. Nothing here, Asuka. The 2 ninjas fell with kunais riddling their back. Another 3 fell, one with a shuriken in his throat, the other 2 with kunais in their chests. Naruto dropped down from one tree, a Rasengan already formed in his hand. He drove it into one enemy, sending the ninja's body through several trees. The broken corpse landed almost 100 feet away. As the remaining 4 turned to him, Kiba and Akamaru leapt out, yelling fang over fang. The ninjas jumped aside, only for one to be covered in bugs and screaming as they sucked away his chakra. Kage immediately came flying out, his hands blurring through hand signs. Water style, ice kunai festival. The ball of water suddenly condensed from the water particles in the air and over 100 ice-made kunais formed from it. Kage flung his hands forward and the kunais shot out at them. One Iwa ninja was pierced over and over again while another took 2 in the arm. The third one was caught in a genjutsu before Kurenai slit his throat. The leader and the wounded one turned to escape through the only open gap, found themselves facing against Hinata, who stood ready, her Byakugan activated. They both rushed her, the leader pulling out a katana while the other one began hand signs. Earth-style, rock barrage jutsu. Several large rocks ripped from the ground and flew at Hinata. She dodged them easily, but the Iwa ninja wasn't done yet. Rock shrapnel. The rocks exploded and hundreds of pieces of shrapnel flew back at Hinata. She quickly adopted the stance of her personal jutsu. Protective 8 trigrams, 64 palms. Her hands moved with ease, blocking the shrapnel with chakra beams from her hands. Naruto used this moment to drive his right claw blades through the ninja's back. The leader of the Iwa ninjas, who had jumped back while his ninja had performed his jutsu, was now fighting Kage. He managed to drive the Yuzu ninja back long enough to turn and rush Hinata as her jutsu ended. He was on her as her jutsu ended and she was barely able to dodge the lethal blow. The blade still managed to cut her arm, but it wasn't anything serious. She turned and struck at him with her Jaiuken, but he dodged away, preparing for another strike. Suddenly, Naruto was between the 2, his eyes red and his katana held at the ready. You're mine now. He rushed forward, his sword arching upwards in a vertical slash. The ninja blocked it, but the force of the impact sent him skidding back. He shook his sword arm, which had numbed slightly. Naruto smirked as the black crosses on his eyes turned to X. Time to die. He said as the Kitsunegan took effect. He was in his opponent's mind and began to read it. Suddenly, his face twisted into anger. He screamed in rage and crushed his opponent's mind into oblivion. as the Iwa shinobi fell. Naruto rushed over to Hinata and immediately looked at her wound. Everyone was looking at him, wondering what had caused him to react in such a way. No, no, please no. Naruto-kun, what is Hinata suddenly started swaying and collapsed into Naruto's arms. Kurenai rushed over as Naruto lowered her to the ground. What's going on? What's happened to her? Naruto slowly began to cry. The ninja's sword. It was coated in poison. Cliché, I know. But I need it so another cliché can happen, so Naruto and Hinata can really be together. Kurenai immediately began to dig through Hinata's medical pouch for antidotes, but Naruto stopped her. It won't work. The poison is fast acting. She'll be gone in a matter of minutes. Kurenai shook her head. There must be something we can do, or are you going to just let her die? Naruto looked at her in rage, his eyes changing back into the Kitsune. Do you think I want that? He looked at her before turning into his mindscape. He rushed to the Kyuubi's cage. Where are you damn fox? Silence mortal, I'm sleeping. Well, wake up. I need you. The fox's eyes opened. Why should I help you? And yes, I know it is for your wrench. Don't you dare call Hinata-chan that. Now help me save her. Why? Because I'll kill myself if you don't. And that means you cease to exist. Kyuubi let out a howl of rage before glaring down at Naruto. Fine. But the only way is for my chakra to be in her. And in its state, it will merge with her and do to her what it did to us. Naruto started at this, then looked down at the ground. Then he looked up. Be ready. He returned to reality where the others were looking at him. He sighed. Kyuubi says he can save Hinata-chan at the cost of her being Hanyu for the rest of her life. The others looked at each other, then Kiba nodded. It doesn't matter to me. I'll stand by her just like I do for you. Kurenai nodded. This will save her life. Shino just nodded. Naruto looked down at Hinata, whose face was becoming paler than normal. He gently lowered his head and whispered. I'm sorry. He placed a hand on the wound and began to channel his and Kyuubi's combined chakra. It formed around his hand and flowed into the wound, disappearing beneath the skin. After a few moments, Hinata's eyes shot open and she turned on her side, vomiting onto the ground. Her whole body shook and she suddenly grasped her stomach, whimpering and crying in pain. Naruto immediately pulled her into his lap, holding her tight. He whispered comforting words into her ears even as she screamed in pain and tears fell down his face. There was a ripping sound as a lavender-furred tail erupted from the seat of her pants. Her ears grew similar colored fur as they morphed into fox ears. Just as suddenly, she stopped shaking and fell against Naruto, panting. He stroked her, crying as he continually whispered, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. She seemed to snuggle against him and her eyes opened for one brief moment. Naruto-kun. Am I dead? She whispered. No. No, you're alive. Good. She said, her eyes closing as she fell unconscious. Naruto just held her close. What will you think when you wake up? I've condemned you to the same life I have had. Can you ever forgive me? Kurenai sighed. Well, I'm glad that's over with. We'll rest here for a while, then head out to find the enemy force. Naruto looked up, his eyes now red from crying. There's no need. I read his mind. They are 2 days behind them, we have 2 days till they arrive at Konoha. He immediately turned back to Hinata, holding her and gently wiping her mouth clean. Kage nodded. I suggest we rest for a few hours, then fall back to Konoha. One of us should move ahead to give them this information. Also, they can take our prisoner. He pointed to the Iwa shinobi, who Shino had drained. He was lying there, his body paralyzed by poison from the bugs. Kurenai nodded and turned to Kiba. You're the fastest. Get the prisoner and get back to Konoha. Inform them of the enemy's distance and tell them about Hinata's current state. Tsunade may need to do a checkup to make sure there is nothing wrong. Kiba nodded and grabbed the Iwa ninja. He tied him up and secured him to Akamaru's back. Then the two of them disappeared into the trees, heading back home. Kurenai turned to Naruto, who was picking Hinata up, bridal style. We'll rest for a few hours, then get out of here. Naruto nodded and carried Hinata to one of the tents. He placed her in one of the ruined sleeping bags and covered her with a blanket. He watched her ears twitch and her now calm face as she slept. He lowered his head, tears beginning to fall again from his eyes. Why? Why must I hurt everyone I care about? Why can't anyone be safe around me? He sat like that for the next 4 hours until Kurenai came into the tent. She looked at Hinata and whispered, is she okay? Naruto nodded. She'll be okay. Her body isn't accustomed to Kyuubi's chakra like mine was, so the process was more exhausting. The poison didn't help either. But she survived and just needs time to rest. Kurenai turned to him. How about you? Naruto just stared at Hinata almost blankly. I don't know. I'm glad she is alive, but what kind of life have I condemned her to? I told her about the hate and prejudice I still get. And now, she will receive it too. I wish there had been another way. But there wasn't. What will she think of me for turning her into this? Kurenai sat next to him. I think you are overreacting. I really think she will not blame you, especially since you saved her life. Just trust her. Naruto looked at her and nodded. Kurenai sighed. We need to get going. Can you carry Hinata? Of course. Naruto carried Hinata outside of the tent, then performed his trademark jutsu. 20 clones popped up and immediately began to take the camp apart. When they finished, they dissipated as everyone picked up their packs. Naruto carried Hinata's as well as his own and carried her bridal style. She snuggled against him, smiling the whole time. Naruto felt some of his fears melt away as he looked at her happy face. They moved out, Naruto moving fast but carefully while the others formed a defensive circle around him. Tsunade stood by the gate with Kiba waiting by her. The trenches were almost complete and other ninjas had begun readying the wall. Large ballistae were being placed at intervals and rows of bolts covered in large explosive tags were being lined up. Other ninjas were reinforcing the wall along its weak points. All in all, their defenses should be ready. When Kiba had returned, Tsunade had sighed in relief. The enemy was still far enough away that they should be ready for them. Not only that, but Gaara, the Kazukiage of Suna, had promised reinforcements and would lead them personally. As long as they could hold, she felt that they would win this war. However, her relief was mixed with concern as Kiba had also informed her of Hinata's condition. She wasn't concerned for her well-being but for her treatment in the village. She hoped that Hinata wouldn't face the same problems as Naruto had. Even if she did though, she knew Hinata would have plenty of people standing next to her. Her thoughts were interrupted by a shout from a sentry on the wall. The rest of Team Kurenai, along with Naruto and Kage appeared. Hinata was still unconscious and in Naruto's arms. Tsunade rushed over to them. How is she? Still asleep. But she has stirred a few times. I think she may wail up soon. Naruto said softly. Tsunade immediately performed a diagnostic jutsu and sighed in relief when she was done. Beyond the change in her DNA, there is nothing wrong. Her body has adapted well to the new features. She should be fine. Naruto nodded. I'm glad to hear that. Do I need to take her to the hospital? Tsunade shook her head. Just take her home and rest. I'll call on you if I need you. Naruto gave her a sad smile and headed off, doing his best to hide Hinata's new characteristics from view. Kurenai came over to Tsunade. He fears she will hate him for what happened. The poor boy has been quiet and upset the whole way home. Tsunade sighed. With everything that has happened, I'm not surprised. It may take him a while to fully trust anyone after what has happened to him. But Hinata is one of the few people who can help him. At the Namika's apartment, Naruto laid Hinata down on the couch as he placed his and her packs aside. He hung his cloak on a coat rack and had finished removing his weapons when he heard a soft sigh behind him. He turned and rushed over to Hinata in time to see her eyes open. She looked around, then smiled as she saw him. Naruto-kun. Where are we? Back home. The mission was a success. Hinata nodded, then frowned as she felt something weird. It felt like there was something extra, but she couldn't figure out what. She reached out and when her hands made contact with the extra thing, her eyes widened. She looked up at Naruto. What happened? Naruto sighed as he kneeled next to her. I had to save your life. But in order to do so I had to make you a Hanyu. Hinata's eyes widened even more and her mouth opened in surprise. What? Chapter 8. Hinata's eyes widened even more and her mouth opened in surprise. What? Naruto nodded softly as she sat up. The wound you had from the katana. It was poisoned, a fast-acting poison. There wasn't anything we could do. I asked Kyuubi for help and he told me that the only way was to channel our combined chakra into you so it would eject the poison from you. But it had fused with your DNA and I'm so sorry. Naruto turned away. I didn't want this for you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Hinata-chan. Suddenly a pair of arms encircled him and he felt a tail wrap around his waist. He turned to see Hinata looking up at him, smiling through a slight blush. Naruto-kun, you don't have to be sorry. You saved me, again. Naruto-kun, I can't be angry at you for saving my life. Besides, I really like this. Naruto's eyes widened as she continued. I mean, this will help me be stronger so I can one day save your life. And this tail, she flipped it around, is so cute and useful. Her smile disappeared and she stared right into his eyes. And me being a Hanyu means I can understand and help you with your burden. Naruto-kun, I'm thankful that you have done this. Please, don't think I'm angry. Naruto looked into those eyes and then he hugged her back, causing a small leap. Even as he did, he felt that feeling again, even stronger than before. He slowly realized that the woman he held in his arms, this wonderful angel, she cared for him on a level he had never before known and experienced. He slowly nodded to himself and pulled back from her. She looked at him questioningly. Hinata-chan, you are so perfect. You can always make me feel better and more than I really am. I don't think I could ever really live a life without you. Hinata smiled at him as he smiled back. Slowly, their smiles faded as they stared at each other. Their faces slowly moved closer together, their eyes beginning to close. Their lips were almost touching when there was a loud knocking on the door, followed by the voice of the pink-haired Kunoichi. "Naruto. Hinata. Open up." They both snapped back to reality and blushed as they moved away from each other. Naruto cleared his throat. I should get that." He stood up, his mind racing. Did I just try to kiss Hinata-chan? Am I really in love with her? He opened the door and Sakura gave him a smile. "Sorry. Can I come in?" Naruto nodded and moved back from the door. Sakura entered, then ran squealing to Hinata. She immediately reached out and touched one of Hinata's ears. "So they are real. They're so cute and fluffy. I love them." She rubbed them until she saw the looks both Naruto and Hinata gave her. She pulled her hand back. "Sorry. Anyways, I came to check on you guys because I heard about what had happened to Hinata. So, everything alright? What's different?" Hinata shrugged. "Honestly, I don't think much has changed. All my senses were increased and my strength, agility and speed are better." Naruto thought for a moment. "What about your Byakugan? Did it get affected?" Hinata activated it, then she and Sakura both gasped. Naruto came around and his mouth opened in amazement. The usual veins were there. But the eyes were different. They were a soft red with gray crosses where the pupils would be. She deactivated it and her eyes returned to their normal lavender, without pupils. She looked at both of them. "Were my eyes different?" Naruto nodded. "I don't know how, but you have the Kitsunegan. Did you still have the Byakugan?" Hinata nodded. "I could see the chakra networks and everything, like normal. But I could also see both of your thoughts. Nothing serious, but whatever you were thinking at the time." Naruto stared at her. "Hinata, I think me and you have just made a new Kekai Genkai. This is big. We need to tell Bachan about this." Tsunade watched the preparations for war. Even now, barricades were being thrown up along the sidewalks and roads. The last of the villagers were being escorted, along with the newest genin students. The older, experienced ones had been drafted for combat and even now, they were busy with the others. Tsunade sighed. At least they only had 2 enemies to deal with. Recent reports had confirmed a rumor that Orochimaru had been betrayed and killed by Sasuke. With him gone, Oda was falling into chaos. As for aim, they were always a weak power and very few of their ninjas had been killed by Naruto. They had voiced some complaints, but nothing more. Tsunade was knocked from her thinking by Shizune opening the door. "Tsunade-sama. Naruto and Hinata are here to see you." Naruto and Hinata entered, followed by Sakura. "Hey Bachan." Naruto said happily. Tsunade growled, but stopped. "So, you seem happy. I take it Hinata wasn't too angry about being a Hanyu." Hinata giggled as her tail flicked around, briefly brushing against Naruto's. They both blushed before Naruto shook his head and became mostly serious. "Ni-chan, me and Hinata discovered something. Sakura came over to check on us and she asked Hinata what was different. Well, it made me wonder if her Byakugan was affected, so I asked her. It turns out that Hinata got the Kitsunegan from her transformation and it mixed with her Byakugan. She has a new Kekai Genkai." As Tsunade looked at Hinata in amazement, she activated her new eyes. They turned to the soft red with gray crosses. Tsunade looked at them in amazement until Hinata blushed and looked away. Naruto looked at her. "You read her mind. Be by accident." "I didn't read anything about the village." Tsunade suddenly looked scared. "Not about him." Hinata just looked away from her as a certain white-haired toad sage came in. Hinata took one look at him, then gagged before turning away. Naruto and Sakura looked at the red-faced medic Sannin and the pervy Sannin and both went "Yuo." Tsunade snapped out of it, desperate to change the subject. "Anyways, this is interesting. Are you sure it is a Kekai Genkai?" Naruto nodded. "It mixed with her Byakugan, so she should be able to pass it on to her kids." Tsunade smiled. "Well, this is wonderful. What is it called?" Hinata looked down for a moment, thinking. Then she looked up. "Dekushigan." Reading eyes. Tsunade nodded. "So, what can you tell me about it?" Hinata gathered her thoughts, then began. "It's not much difference from the Kitsune or Byakugan. My Byakugan isn't any different, except now I can read the unguarded thoughts of a person, even without looking into their eyes. I guess the rest of the Kitsunegan is normal, as I couldn't read all of your mind until I looked into your eyes." Tsunade jotted down what Hinata told her and nodded. "Well, this is good. With this, Hinata, you could start your own clan. What do you think?" Hinata shook her head. "No. If I'm going to start a clan, it will be as the wife of the clan head. Hopefully, it will be with a certain someone." She began to blush while Naruto's ears lowered and flicked in embarrassment. Tsunade nodded. Jiraiya smiled before pulling out his notebook. "Well, this is all good for my next book. Now, Hinata, perhaps you could open that coat and let me touch those ears and tail so I can know what they feel like." A sudden killer intent came off the blonde Hanyu and the medic Sanin. Jiraiya placed the notebook back in his pocket and placed his hands up in surrender. Fine, fine. So, anyways, I have a report. The defenses are almost complete and we've gathered as many ninjas together as we can. We still need to reinforce the gate, but it shouldn't take more than an hour. Tsunade nodded. Fine. Now get moving before I'm forced to put you in the hospital. That is, if Naruto doesn't do that. Jiraiya took one look at Naruto, who was grinding his teeth together, growling out, "Iro Sanin." The Toad Sage nodded and leapt out the window. Naruto took in a deep breath and calmed down. Right. So, you need anything else, Bachan? He barely ducked under the punch Tsunade threw at him and chuckled. Tsunade began to smirk. I really like that other name. Call me that or I'll hit you into next week, Ataudo. Naruto nodded and rubbed the back of his head. You got it. Well, if that's it, we're going to get going. Hinata-chan, do you want to go get some lunch with me? Hinata blushed but happily nodded. Sakura and Tsunade watched as the two of them left. Sakura sighed happily. They really look good together, don't they? They do. I just hope the Baka realizes his feelings for her. I think he does love her, but he doesn't know what love is. That's partly my fault. Tsunade sighed. It's all in the past now. All we can do is look to the future and hope for the best. Let's just make sure they have a future to have. Naruto and Hinata had packed a lunch and ate it in the park. They happily talked about almost anything and had strolled through the park. Almost unconsciously, their hands had entwined as they walked. They stayed in the park, enjoying the short time they had before they had to fight for their village. As the sun began to set, Naruto took her up to the top of the Hokage's monument. They sat down, watching the sunset over the village. Naruto leaned against a tree, with Hinata sitting in front of him. He stroked one of her ears, his tail wrapped around her waist. She gently stroked it, causing him to slightly purr. She giggled at the sound until he stroked her tail, getting the same noise from her. They both laughed, happy at being so close with each other. Naruto sighed as he looked back over the village. It's so peaceful. You wouldn't think we were only days, if not hours from a battle for this village. Hinata nodded. It's so unbelievable. I feel so weird. I should be anxious, worried about the fight to come. But right now I'm just so happy and calm. She looked up at him. We'll win, won't we? Naruto gave her his foxy grin. Of course we will. No matter what, we will win this fight. He sobered for a moment and was silent for a moment. Then he spoke again. Hinata-chan. Yes, Naruto-kun. I don't know what will happen during the battle. I know we will both fight our best. But in case something happens to one of us, I want you to know something. As Hinata looked back up at him again, he drew in a breath. Hinata-chan, I didn't understand what love is. But, even though we've been together for only a few days, I think I'm beginning to understand. Love is finding someone who makes you happy. Someone who you will do anything for. I would gladly move the heavens and the earth if you asked me to. Hinata-chan, I think that I do love you. Hinata's eyes watered as she smiled happily. She gently placed a hand on Naruto's cheek. Naruto-kun, I love you too. I've loved you for so long. To hear you say that you don't know how long I have waited for that. Naruto smiled at her. You won't have to wait any longer. Then he slowly lowered his head as she raised hers. Their lips gently pressed together and stayed that way for several moments. They broke apart, their eyes closed. They both slowly opened their eyes and smiled. Hinata turned around, so she was facing Naruto. That was great. Naruto nodded. It was. But I think it can be even better. He reached out and pulled her closer. She was blushing at how close they were. She placed her arms around his neck while he placed one hand around her waist. The other one came up behind her head. He gently pulled her closer and they kissed again. But this time, the kiss was more passionate. He held her closer, so there was more contact. Slowly, his hand on her waist moved along her back, gently rubbing it. Her arms moved to his back, gripping him, as if she was afraid to lose him if she let go. After several minutes, they both pulled back, panting. Naruto smiled at the beautiful Hanyu in his arms. I love you, Hinata-hime. And I you, Naruto-kun. Anyone know what Prince might be? I think it might be good to know. They just sat there, enjoying the closeness between them. They watched the last of the sun's rays disappear and the stars began to shine. Naruto sighed, somewhat unhappily. We should get home. We're going to need plenty of rest for the days to come. Hinata nodded and moved off of Naruto as he began to stand up. Before she could stand, Naruto held out a hand and helped her to her feet. Then he suddenly picked her up, earning a startled gasp, followed by a happy giggle. Naruto smiled at the blushing girl in his arms. That blush is so cute. I think it is one of the things I love about you. Then he turned and began a steady descent down the front of the mountain, landing on protruding rocks with ease until he was level with the roofs of the buildings. With a mighty push, he launched himself onto a roof. In his arms, Hinata smiled in exhilaration as she gripped him tightly around the neck. Naruto kept his pace and they were back at their home in a matter of minutes. Naruto lowered her to her feet and opened the door. Almost immediately, he sensed something wrong. He could smell several ninjas present in the darkened apartment and hear their soft breathing. Beside him, Hinata stiffened as she sensed them as well. She activated her new power, her Dakushigan. She growled in anger. I can see you all. You may as well come out. The lights came on, revealing several members of the Hyuga main family. Hiashi stood in front of them, his lips curling in disgust. So, the rumors were true. You were corrupted into a half-demon spawn. But still, you have been given a great gift from it, haven't you? His eyes barely glanced at Hinata's before looking towards Naruto. I thank you, demon scum. Now, I will have her back so we can use her to breed a much more powerful Byakugan and establish our clan superiority forever. Naruto adopted a ready stance. That's the same thinking as the Uchihas. Look where it got them. They relied on the Sharingan for their superiority and were massacred by the one who knew the truth. A true shinobi's strength lies not in his abilities but in his ability to persevere, no matter what. Leave my home now and I won't report this to Tsunade-sama. Hiyashi's face contorted in anger. Silence. I have had enough of you. You should have been killed the day you were sealed and I will see to it that it is done. He charged Naruto, his fist striking out to nail Naruto's heart in a Juken strike. But as he was about to strike Naruto, his arm was caught while another hand struck the chakra points along his arm. It became weak and when released, flopped to his side. He looked at amazement as Hinata settled back into her Juken stance. The other members immediately rushed forward, only to be met by Naruto, who had unsheathed his claws and katana. I suggest that unless you all want to die, you back it up and don't move. His eyes had turned over to the Kitsunegan and he watched all of them as they slowly backed up. Hinata watched her father as he just stood there, dumbfounded. Hiashi-san, we don't have time for this. The village needs every ninja to fight the coming battle. Petty disputes like this could lead to all of us getting killed or enslaved. Now I will say this one more time. Leave now or else. Naruto watched the Hyuga leader, waiting for his response. Eventually, the Hyuga snapped out of his trance and turned to the others. We're leaving. Now. He turned back to Naruto. We're not done yet. Then he followed the others through the door. Naruto sighed as he closed it. He turned to Hinata, surprised to see her still standing there, almost like she was in shock. Naruto came over to her. Hinata-chan. You okay? Slowly, she turned to him. Did I just stand up to my father? When Naruto nodded, she stood there for a moment. Then her eyes rolled back into her head and she began to fall over. Naruto immediately grabbed her as she fell. Naruto sighed. Guess it was a major shock to her. But it still is good. It means she's gaining confidence. Naruto gently picked her up and carried her to her bedroom. He laid her out on her bed, removed her sandals, then removed her jacket. He nearly had a nosebleed at the sight of the black Kunoichi tank top and fishnet shirt on underneath. Holy crap. She's hot. She's got a great body, wait a minute. Bad. No pervy thoughts. Damn you, Iro-sanin. The Kyuubi laughed at him. Fool. You should mount her now and claim her as your own. The mental killer intent Naruto gave off actually caused the Kyuubi to back up. Naruto slowly ground out what he was thinking. If you ever suggest that again, you will find yourself living in a cage 100 sizes too small for you. Do I make myself clear? Kyuubi grumbled and went back to sleep. Naruto sighed as he pulled the blankets over Hinata and kissed her on the lips. Good night, my beautiful vixen. Pleasant dreams. Naruto himself went to his parents' room and fell on the bed, sighing. As always, he had a few minutes where he wondered if he should sleep in this bed. But eventually, his exhaustion won out and he fell asleep as well. The last of the defenses were complete and just in time. Tsunade had ordered all her ninjas behind the wall and she herself stood on the wall, ready to lead those under her command into battle. Now, the 250 Konoha shinobi stood ready, awaiting the enemy. The wind blew by, ruffling hair and clothing. Several ninjas stood ready at their ballistas, ready to fire at a moment's notice. Naruto and Hinata stood together. With the revelation of the Dakushigan, Tsunade had given the two of them special orders. Flashback, I have a covert mission for the two of you. Hinata, with your new ability, I want you to try and find the leaders of this force. When you do, I want you to tell Naruto. Naruto, once you have the targets, I want you to disable or kill them. If the enemy loses their leaders, they will be that much more disorganized and easier to hold off. Understand? The two Hanyu nodded and Tsunade smiled at them. Be careful. I don't want anything happening to you two out there. Alright. Flashback ends. Now, Hinata had her Taijutsu on and was scanning for the enemy. Every other person with tracking skills was doing the same. Eventually a shout went up from a ninja station near an Abiram. Got them. They are 2 miles out and closing fast. they're moving through the tree tops. Tsunade turned and nodded to Ibiki. He raised a hand and the ballisty crews pulled back on the siege equipment, raising the elevation. They began to yank back on the turn wheels, drawing the cords back. When they were ready, Ibiki dropped his hand. With large whooshes, the bolts were launched, arching up into the air. They glinted in the sunlight before plummeting towards the ground, their tags igniting. Suddenly, there were large explosions and screams of pain and surprise. Tsunade nodded grimly. So, it has begun. She turned to her shinobi. Remember for what you fight for. Our hopes, our dreams, and our people. Konoha. The cry went up along the wall as the combined forces of Kumo and Iwa broke through the trees. They immediately raced towards the wall, unleashing kunais with exploding tags and various jutsus. The attacks hit the wall, causing it to shudder, but hold firm. A second wave of explosive bolts, along with a shower of kunais, shurikens, and offensive jutsus rained down, causing more death and destruction. The first wave of enemies rushed the wall, only for the first few ranks to scream as they disappeared into the disguised spear trenches. The next ranks leapt over them and began to rush up the wall. They were met by a barrage of small weapons fire. Easiest way to describe it. Not guns, but kunai and shurikens. Those that weren't killed or too badly wounded returned the favor. Most were blocked, but a few hit home, and some of the Konoha shinobi fell from the wall. The few Kumo and Iwa ninja to make it to the wall were instantly set upon. Kunais clashed and limbs struck bodies as the battle for the wall began. Naruto's katana easily sheared through one man's arm. He ducked under his wounded adversary and finished him with a reverse stab. Hinata struck a man's chakra points with several strikes, knocking him off the wall and into the open space behind him. She immediately turned, horrified at what she had done, but determined to keep going. She moved to watch Naruto's back while her eyes continued to scan the thoughts rushing through the people around her and the enemies on the ground. The Konoha ninja immediately spat fire from his mouth, roasting several enemies rushing up the wall. Their burning bodies fell back, knocking over others behind them. Suddenly a barrage of stones from the ground ripped into one of the ballistae, causing the bolt on it to explode, killing several ninjas of both sides nearby. All around there were people yelling, fighting, falling, some to stand back up, others to never rise again. To some of the younger ninjas, it was too much. They keeled over, throwing up, while others screamed in fear. One boy, only 13, found a Kumo ninja in front of him, raising a sword to kill him. Suddenly, 3 blades erupted through his chest. The Kumo ninja fell, revealing the cloaked and hooded Naruto Namikaze, the Fox Knight. The genin looked at him in awe. "Dead anyone who's hurt and get them down to the ground. Go." Naruto moved off as the genin slowly nodded and began helping a badly wounded Chunin off the wall. Naruto turned to see Ino, Shikamaru and Choji surrounded by 5 enemies. Shikamaru caught 3 of them in his shadow possession jutsu, with Choji quickly dispatching them. Ino caught another with a mind destruction jutsu and he started attacking his nearby allies. But the 5th came up behind her and struck her in the shoulder with a kunai. As Ino fell to the ground, the ninja suddenly stopped what he was doing and keeled over, with no wound. Naruto stood there, his eyes in the second form of the Kitsunegan. He nodded to Ino, who was being helped up, and turned to see Hinata still behind him. He scanned the ranks of enemies below on the ground. There were still many of them, and even worse, they were beginning to bring up some siege equipment of their own. Naruto sighed as he thought, this is going to be a long day. Then he sheathed his katana and performed his modified ram sign, shouting. Mass Shadow Clone Jutsu. Dozens of shadow clones popped up and immediately joined the fray. Naruto drew his sword and leapt back into the fight. Chapter 9. Naruto watched the enemy in front of him fall as his claws lacerated the shinobi's chest. He panted a bit as the 2 hours of straight fighting were starting to take their toll on him. He looked around at his fellow ninja. Many of the lesser ranked shinobi were beginning to falter as their chakra and stamina were exhausted. Behind him, Hinata wiped the perspiration on her forehead. Her new Hanyu DNA gave her more stamina than usual, but she was still getting used to it. The wall was momentarily clear, but not free. A sudden barrage of rocks came over from the 4 trebuchets the enemy had. Naruto watched as Tsunade, Lee, Guy, and Sakura managed to crush some of the rocks with their superhuman strength. Others crashed into the wall top, most missing Konoha ninja. A few were injured by the shrapnel. Naruto sighed and turned to Hinata. You found anything yet? We need to find those leaders. Hinata immediately scanned the ground, her new Jujutsu straining. She sighed in defeat. I can't find them. I don't even know where to look. She started feeling despair at her weakness until Naruto grabbed her and brought her to look at him. Hinata-chan, don't give up. Just keep trying. I know you can do it. Hinata slowly nodded and turned back to her task as Tsunade came over. She looked at the 2 Hanyu, her face worried. We're in trouble. We can hold the wall if it wasn't for those damn trebuchets. Do either of you think you could do something about them? Naruto looked at them. He studied the still 300 some ninja waiting and sighed. There might be a way. But it's dangerous and there is a good chance I'll get caught or killed. If I can sneak down further along the wall, I can slip over, sneak around behind them and take the trebuchets out. Then I have to get back, which is the hardest part. Hinata grabbed his hand. I'm coming with you. It will give you a better chance. Don't even think about disagreeing with me. Naruto saw the look in her eyes and sighed. I don't want to lose you, Hinata. You won't. We'll either live together or die together. I promise you that. Naruto nodded and turned to Tsunade. Keep them distracted for 20 minutes. I'll do the rest. Tsunade nodded and turned to the ballistae. Give them a good volley. On the ground, 2 ninjas stood near the trebuchets, watching the battle. Kuro, the head of Anbu for the Iwa Shinobi, and Izumi, the strategist for Kumo. They had been placed in command of the assault on Konoha. Now, they watched a battle from a safe distance. So far, they had launched 3 waves against the wall. Half their ninja had rushed the wall. Most had died, and the few survivors had retreated. But they had kept the Konoha shinobi busy and thinned the defenders' ranks. Now, their siege weapons were in place, and the constant barrage of rocks was keeping the enemy's head down. Soon, they would launch their final assault. Kuro turned to Nezumi, who was busy looking over her map. Well, what now? How much longer till we can attack? Nezumi sighed and turned to the action-craving Iwang. Patience. We will take the village. They can't possibly be able to stand up to us long. Kuro sighed. Fine. But I just hate waiting like this. Suddenly, the trebuchet farther along suddenly blew up. The ninja working on it screamed in pain as parts of their bodies were ripped off in the explosion. Kuro and Nezumi immediately turned, only to see a slight movement next to the second trebuchet. It disappeared and a few seconds later, the second siege weapon exploded as well. Now, the other ninjas were falling back and moving to guard the third and fourth trebuchet. Nezumi quickly scanned the surrounding woods, but saw nothing. What was that? Naruto and Hinata crouched in some treetops, watching the scene below. Naruto sighed as he saw the 2 remaining trebuchets come under heavy guard. Well, I got 2. But there are too many for my invisibility genjutsu now. Hinata scanned the group and suddenly stopped. She gave a small smile. Naruto-kun, I think I've found them. The 2 ninjas there, standing near the 4th trebuchet. The guy in the Iwa Anbu outfit and the woman from Kumo. Naruto marked both of them in his mind and nodded. Well, looks like it's time to introduce them all to the Fox Knight. He pulled up his face mask, pulled up his hood, and performed his familiar jutsu. A dozen Narutos, all armed and ready, appeared with him. The original turned to Hinata. The clones will draw them off. We'll hit the leaders while the guards are distracted. Ready? As Hinata nodded, Naruto sent his clones into battle. With roars and demonic fox howls, they rushed into combat. Page launched another flurry of ice kunai from the wall, aiming for a group of enemies who had cleared a section of the trench and were hiding in it. 3 were killed by the ice weapons, while another 4 were wounded. He turned to see the shadow clones emerge from the trees, letting loose frightening howls and battle cries. He shook his head in amusement. Kushina, I remember you doing something similar. Looks like your son is more like you than anyone thought. He turned and launched an explosive tag on a kunai, decimating the rest of the ninjas in the trench. Izumi and Kuro watched a dozen cloaked figures jump into a swarm of their ninjas. They all had their katanas drawn and those claw blades unsheathed. They watched in amazement at the skill and speed the clones moved with. One clone blocked an attack with a parry of his katana before spinning to his left, the claw blades on that side coming around to slash across the ninja's throat. Even with their skill they were greatly outnumbered. One clone was impaled with a dozen kunai, while 2 more were destroyed by being sucked into the ground. Izumi and Kuro suddenly felt 2 chakra signatures moving towards and spun around to see another Fox Knight and a dark-haired female Hanyu coming towards them. Naruto held his katana out to his right as he charged Kuro, shouting, I've got this one. Get the other one, Hinata. Naruto slashed upwards with his left claws, but Kuro leaned back. Naruto turned it into a spin to his right, his sword coming around to slash Kuro's chest. It was only a flesh wound, but it still worried Kuro. Naruto smirked behind his mask. Is that the best you have? I can tell you're at least Anbu. I would think you would be able to dodge one little sword. Kuro had spent years gaining as much control over his emotions. He had trouble with his patience, but other than that, there hadn't been a person alive who could make him angry. But this guy was getting on his nerves. Try this. Earth-style, earth bombardment jutsu. A large number of heavy rocks were ripped from the ground before coming down at the Fox Knight. He looked up at them, his blade held at the ready. Genjutsu art. Mirage blade slash. With almost unseen movement, Naruto's blade began to slash through the rocks as they fell. Izumi and Hinata, who were busy straining with their locked kunai, looked over at the shards of demolished rocks raining down around him. He came to a stop, his blade still shining, without a scratch or dent in it. Nezumi turned to Hinata. That's quite a man there. Maybe when he's dead, we can learn some of his techniques. The only ones dying here are you. Naruto-kun still has to fulfill his dream. And I will make sure he becomes Hokage. The two women separated, throwing their kunai at each other. Nezumi began handisms for a ninjutsu. Lightning style, static spread jutsu. From her fingers several bolts of lightning leapt out. Hinata dodged to one side, but one bolt seared her jacket, catching it on fire. The Hyuga Hanyu ripped it off and threw it aside, before settling into her Taijutsu stance. She charged forward, her Juuken strike causing Nezumi to duck. But Hinata turned into a sweeping kick, which knocked the Kumo shinobi over. Hinata was about to strike when Nezumi spun her back, her feet knocking Hinata back. Naruto's katana was locked with two kunai held by Kuro. He tried to punch with his left, his claws extended, but Kuro flipped over him. Naruto turned, panting. He couldn't keep this up forever. Sure, he was a Hanyu of Kyuubi, but his human half was still limited. Hinata was the same way, even worse, since her stamina was lower than Naruto's. They had to finish this, and fast. Naruto struck his sword in the ground and started performing hand signs. He finished and bit his thumb before slamming the hand into the ground, shouting, summoning jutsu. In a poof of smoke, two foxes appeared. One was red-furred, with 4 tails. The other was blue, with 3 tails. They turned to Naruto and bowed. What do you need of us? Naruto nodded to both of them. I need you to transform and help us in battle. Ken, you help me. Yari, go to Hinata and help her as best you can. Ken nodded and leapt into the air, transforming into a second katana, which looked similar to Kitsune no Higasha, except the fox head at the base of the hilt. Naruto grabbed the blade with his left hand. He held both of them at the ready. Yari ran over to Hinata, who was trading blows with Nezumi. Hinata managed to knock Nezumi back when Yari came up. Naruto-sama sent me to help you. Please, trust me. The female fox turned into a long blue spear with a fox head below the blade. Hinata hesitantly grabbed the spear and suddenly felt a presence with her. I am Yari, one of the demon fox weapons. Me and my fellow summons transform into weapons to help the one we serve. I know you don't have any training in weapons outside of kunai and shuriken. Please just trust me and let me guide you. Hinata nodded and opened her mind to the presence. Suddenly she felt like the spear in her hand was a natural part of her. She watched as Nezumi charged forward and blocked the kunai with the spear pole. She suddenly felt herself moving in battle stances she had never learned. She stabbed at Nezumi, but when the blade was parried away, she spun around, bring the spear blade smashing down. Yari's style of spear fighting will be influenced by Sung Mina's fighting from Soul Calibur 2. Nezumi barely managed to jump back as the spear blade crashed into the ground. Hinata pulled the spear back quickly, holding it at the ready. In her mind, she was wondering what it was exactly that she was doing. Nezumi rushed forward, secretly drawing a second kunai. As Hinata blocked the strike from the first, the second kunai flashed, slashing open Hinata's left arm. She backed up, holding the wound for a few seconds. When she pulled her hand away, it was already beginning to seal up. What? How are you able to do that? Naruto-kun gave me a great gift. He saved my life and made me stronger than before. Hinata held the spear at the ready when Yari sent Imagine into her head. Hinata nodded. It is time to end this. Yurijutsu art. Gale Barrage. Hinata channeled chakra into the spear as she began to spin it on one side of her, then the other. As the spear spun back and forth, the chakra intensified before flying off like scything wind blades. Namuzi tried to dodge but couldn't get away fast enough. The blades of chakra cut into her, knocking her back against a tree. She fell to the ground, bleeding to death out of numerous wounds. Hinata bowed her head. I am sorry. But I will protect my home and those precious to me. Naruto's katana slashed open Kuro's right shoulder, causing the Anbu captain to back up. Naruto held one blade forward and the other above his head. Kuro looked at him in fear and wondered where the other ninjas were. They should have come to his aid by now. He turned and looked in horror as his men were fleeing, now being chased by hordes of ninjas from Suna. Bara, the Kazekage, was at the head of them, catching ninjas in his sand and crushing them. Kuro turned back to Naruto, who smiled behind his mask. It's over. Surrender, try to run, or die fighting. Doesn't matter to me. Kuro glared at him in hatred. I will finish you off at least. He rushed forward, ready for one final blow. Naruto shook his head. Wrong answer. Kitsune Kenjutsu art. Twin star slash. With that, Naruto attacked, his blade slashing in his opponent's body. He stopped there, and then his body separated along 10 slash lines that had formed 2 stars. Naruto slowly bowed to his enemy's corpse before cleaning both swords. With a nod to the one sword, it transformed back to the 4-tailed fox. Hinata's spear also transformed back. The 2 foxes bowed to Naruto and Hinata before disappearing. Naruto dropped next to a tree and leaned back against it, panting. Hinata came over and sat next to him. The two looked at each and smiled, grabbing each other's hands. Naruto leaned over and kissed Hinata. "You did spectacular out there." Hinata giggled as Naruto's tail wrapped around hers. They both sat there for several minutes, kissing, until 3 Suna ninjas came over. Naruto looked up to see Temari giggling, Kankuro giving them a lecherous smile, and Gaara watching them with the neutral expression his face always had. Naruto blushed while smiling embarrassingly. He rubbed the back of his head. "Hey guys. Have you met my girlfriend?" Gaara shook his head. "No. I am Gaara, Kazekage of Suna. This is my brother Kankuro and my sister Temari." Hinata bowed her head. "I'm Hinata, formerly of the Hyuga clan. It is an honor to meet you, Gaara-sama." Naruto helped her to her feet and turned back to the former Jinchuriki of Shukaku. "I'm glad you guys got here when you did. I don't think we would have been able to get out of this alive." Gaara shrugged his shoulders. "I owed both Konoha and you my life. Anything I can do to pay back that debt, I will do it." Tsunade approached, along with several of her ninjas. She bowed to Gaara, who returned the bow. "I thank you for your aid. You have saved many lives and we owe you much. As for you two, you did an excellent job out there. Nicely done." Naruto and Hinata both bowed in acknowledgement. Tsunade turned to look along the wall. Several sections were heavily damaged. She sighed as she saw Konoha ninja lying on the ground near the base of the wall. "We need to start gathering the dead. The wounded have already been taken to the hospital." With a nod, they scattered to begin gathering the bodies of their comrades. Naruto stopped Hinata for a moment and held her face in his hands. "Are you okay?" His face showed he was worried. Hinata nodded. I'm a little horrified at some of the lives I took. I know that it was to defend Konoha, but I hate taking life." Naruto kissed her forehead. "It's alright. You have a good and kind heart. That is one of the many things I love about you. Hinata, don't be ashamed of who you are. If you can, spare an enemy unless they truly don't deserve life. But if you do take life, take it honorably." Hinata nodded and moved close to Naruto. He hugged her, giving her comfort. Finally she pulled back and smiled. "Thank you, Naruto-kun. You always know what to say to make me feel better." Naruto smiled. "That's what I'm supposed to do, right? Come on, let's get to work." The two of them moved on to remove the dead from the field. The Ashi watched the two Hanyu moving across the field. He had his Hyuga watch the two during the fight, and what they had reported had continued to affirm what he had learned in Narita's apartment. She has gained courage, and with it, her skills have increased. Especially with her Hanyu powers. And that Dojutsu. Dekushigen. It would make an excellent addition to the Hyuga clan. The Ashi looked at the sky, thinking, we need her back. She will help the clan make it stronger. But as long as Namikaze is around, she will never return to the clan. We must deal with him if we are to strengthen the clan. But we must be subtle." He turned to the two Hyugas nearby. "Report back to the clan. Have the elders ready to meet when I return." "Yes, Hiashi-sama." The two disappeared. Hiashi turned back to watch Naruto and Hinata. "We will be strong. And you will not stop us, demon scum." The following day, memorial services were held to honor those who had died in defense of the village. Out of the ninja, 22 ninjas had been killed and another 5 had been crippled for life. As per tradition, the entire shinobi force, as well as those related to the deceased, paid their final respects to the dead. Naruto silently approached the dais with the pictures of the dead and bowed his head, his tail and ears drooping down. Hinata and Kage stood next to him, paying their own respect. As they finished, they stepped away as others came up. Naruto held Hinata's hand as they silently prayed for those who had lost loved ones. As the memorial ended, they walked away, with Kage behind them. Hinata clutched Naruto's arm. Many people bowed in respect as they had learned of the role the two had played in the defense of the village. Naruto looked at his girlfriend. "Hinata-chan, I was wondering. Would you like for me to train you?" Hinata looked up as Naruto continued. "There are some things I could teach you besides fully understanding and using your Hanyu abilities. If you would like me to. I can understand if you don't want me to." Hinata smiled and nodded. "Naruto-kun, I would love for you to train me. But what about my teammates?" Naruto thought for a moment, then shrugged. "Well, we could train with them or before or after them. I wasn't asking you to stop working with them." Hinata smiled and hugged his arm. "Let's talk to them. I'm sure they would love to train with you as well." Kage smiled as he watched the happy couple. He was happy to see his student son so happy, especially after he had learned of the boy's life. "Kushina, I wish you could see your son. He seems truly happy." Kage sighed as he wished he could see his former pupil. In the meeting room of the Hyuga main house, the elders had convened again. Hiashi had explained what he had learned about Hinata and had proposed a plan to bring her back into the clan. Now, they were ready to give him their decision. "Hiashi-sama, we have decided to accept your plan. But know that if it should fail, we will state that we had no knowledge of your intentions. Do you accept this?" Hiashi nodded. "I understand. I thank you. He bowed, then stood and left. He smiled. Very well. It is time to end the threat of someone usurping the Hyuga's rightful place as the strongest clan in Konoha. Soon, demon brat, you will be gone. What if Neglected Naruto has legacy of primordial fox? Thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel and leave a like if you guys need the next part, comment down, and thanks for watching the video and see you guys in the next video.